Part 1. The Confrontation. Those people don't belong in first class. Can't you move them somewhere else? Elaine Whitfield's voice sliced through the pre-boarding area of Gate B47 like a serrated knife. She stood with designer luggage arranged around her like sentinels. A matched set of Toomey Alpha 3 in brushed titanium, each piece worth more than a month of the gate agent's salary. The gate agent, Sofia Rodriguez, maintained a professional smile even as her spine stiffened. "Ma'am, all passengers have assigned seating based on their tickets. I'm afraid I can't reassign seats based on personal preferences." Elaine's Cartier watch caught the fluorescent airport lighting as she gestured toward the Johnson family, a black couple with twin 10-year-old daughters waiting quietly in the pre-boarding area. The girls wore matching purple sweaters, their school backpacks decorated with honor roll stickers. Mrs. Johnson helped her husband organize their boarding documents, their movements efficient and practiced. "Look at them," Elaine continued, lowering her voice but not enough to prevent others from hearing. "They clearly don't travel often. They'll disrupt the entire first-class cabin. I paid $4,300 for this ticket. I shouldn't have to share my experience with people who don't understand proper etiquette." 3 rows away, Captain Marcus Reynolds froze, his pilot's cap tucked under his arm as he reviewed last-minute flight plan changes on his tablet. At 47, Reynolds carried himself with the disciplined posture of his Air Force background. 22 years of commercial flying had earned him the respect of colleagues and regular passengers alike. The 4 stripes on his perfectly pressed uniform sleeves gleamed under the gate lights. Sofia Rodriguez caught Captain Reynolds' eye briefly, her expression communicating volumes. This wasn't the first difficult passenger of the day, and Atlanta International Airport's morning rush created enough pressure without adding discrimination to the mix. "Ma'am," Sofia tried again, "Skylink Airlines has a strict non-discrimination policy. All passengers who have purchased first-class tickets are entitled to their assigned seats." Elaine pulled out her phone, the latest iPhone Pro Max in gold, and began recording. "I'm documenting this for my followers. This is exactly what I talk about in my travel series, how airlines have completely abandoned standards. I've been Platinum Elite for 9 years, and this is how you treat your most valuable customers." Her voice carried deliberately, ensuring others would turn to watch. Several did, their expressions ranging from embarrassment to uncomfortable fascination. An elderly white couple exchanged troubled glances. A young Hispanic man in a business suit shifted uncomfortably, pretending to be absorbed in his laptop. Mrs. Johnson positioned herself between Elaine and her daughters, her expression neutral, but shoulders tense. Her husband placed a gentle hand on her back, a gesture of solidarity they'd likely perfected through similar experiences. "Is there a problem here?" Flight attendant Kevin Baker approached from the jetway, his Skylink uniform immaculate despite the early hour. At 29, Kevin had already handled his share of difficult passengers, but something in Elaine's tone made him straighten to his full height. "This woman is trying to film the Johnson family and has requested they be moved from first class," Sofia explained quietly. Kevin's eyes flickered with recognition. "Ms. Whitfield, isn't it I believe we've had you on several flights before?" Elaine's expression briefly registered surprise before smoothing into practiced indignation. "So you recognize your premium customers. At least someone at this airline has standards." "I'm simply requesting appropriate seating arrangements." Kevin's response was measured. "All of our first-class passengers have appropriate seating arrangements, Ms. Whitfield. That's why they purchased first-class tickets." He emphasized the last word slightly. Elaine continued filming, her phone now capturing Kevin's face. "So you're refusing to accommodate a Platinum Elite member's reasonable request? My followers will love this." Her social media accounts, 750,000 followers across platforms, had been built on travel outrage content that generated reliable engagement. Behind her phone, her lips curled into a smile that never reached her eyes. The real-time comments already appearing on her live stream fueled her performance. "Don't take this, Elaine. Tell them who you are. They can't treat you this way." Travel Queen, support. "This is why I stopped flying Skylink. No respect for loyal customers." Elite Travel 365. "Those people always take forever to board anyway." The comments validated her, each notification ping reinforcing her sense of righteous indignation. Her followers understood what these airline employees refused to acknowledge. that some passengers were simply more valuable than others. At the counter, First Officer Diana Morales approached Captain Reynolds, flight plan in hand. "We've got weather building along the road. Nothing major, but I've plotted an alternative approach into Chicago if we need it." Reynolds nodded, but his attention remained on the developing situation at the gate. "What's happening over there?" "Diana, Platinum Elite passenger making noise about the Johnsons in first class. Same story, different day." Diana's expression darkened slightly. In her 8 years with the airline, she'd seen this scenario play out repeatedly. Reynolds checked his watch. "We're scheduled to push back in 43 minutes. Let's keep an eye on it. If it escalates, we may need to make some decisions." "Copy that." Diana understood perfectly what remained unsaid. As command crew, they had final authority over who flew on their aircraft. Safety wasn't just about mechanical systems. It included the human element as well. Elaine's voice rose again as boarding preparations continued. "I can't believe this. Look at them. They're taking forever just to organize their boarding passes. This is exactly what I was worried about." The Johnson family was doing nothing unusual, simply ensuring their documents were ready for the impending boarding call. Mrs. Johnson met Elaine's camera with a level gaze but remained silent, a decision born from experience rather than intimidation. Her daughters looked up questioningly, sensing the tension but protected from understanding its full ugliness by their mother's composed demeanor. Several passengers began pulling out their own phones, some recording discreetly. One man in a Yale sweatshirt didn't bother with subtlety, pointing his camera directly at Elaine with an expression of open disapproval. "Boarding will begin in approximately 15 minutes, Sophia announced over the gate microphone, her voice professionally detached despite the tension. "We'll begin with our pre-boarding passengers, including families with small children, active military personnel, and passengers requiring additional assistance." Elaine stepped closer to the counter, her voice low but intense. "I want your name and employee ID number. This entire situation is unacceptable." Behind her, the Johnson family gathered their belongings, preparing to board when called. Their dignified silence spoke volumes. Captain Reynolds tucked his tablet into his flight bag, decision crystallizing in his mind. Whatever happened next, he would not allow discrimination to follow them into the sky. Boarding process escalation. Pre-boarding will now begin for Skylink Flight 1742, with service to Chicago O'Hare, Sophia announced it, her voice betraying none of the tension that had built over the previous 20 minutes. The Johnson family moved forward with their boarding passes, their twins staying close as the family prepared to enter the jetway. Elaine Whitfield stepped directly into their path, her phone still recording. "Excuse me, but I believe Platinum Elite members should board first. It's airline policy." Her voice carried a fake sweetness that did nothing to mask the underlying hostility. "Ma'am, families with children are part of our pre-boarding group," Kevin explained, stepping between Elaine and the Johnsons. "Platinum Elite members board immediately after, in Group 1. So now they get special treatment." Elaine's voice rose, ensuring nearby passengers would hear. "First they take up first-class seats, and now they get to board before loyal customers. Mrs. Johnson placed protective hands on her daughter's shoulders, gently steering them around the confrontation. Mr. Johnson positioned himself between his family and Elaine, his expression neutral but stance firm. "Our boarding procedures apply to all passengers equally," Kevin said, maintaining eye contact with Elaine. "Families with children, regardless of race or class, are welcomed during pre-boarding." "I never mentioned race," Elaine snapped, though her previous comments and current behavior made her focus abundantly clear. "Don't put words in my mouth while I'm recording." From the jetway entrance, Captain Reynolds observed the interaction, his experienced eyes assessing the situation. 22 years in commercial aviation and 4 years in the Air Force had taught him to recognize potential in-flight disruptions before they happened. He nodded slightly to Kevin, a silent communication between crew members. As the Johnson family proceeded down the jetway, Elaine's voice followed them. "This is exactly what I mean about certain types of travelers. They always get special treatment, and it's regular paying customers who suffer." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. An older woman in a business suit shook her head in visible disapproval. The man in the Yale sweatshirt continued recording, capturing Elaine's behavior from another angle. "Group 1 boarding will begin momentarily," Sophia announced, attempting to move the process forward. Elaine stepped to the front of the line, her designer luggage creating an obstacle for others. When her boarding pass was scanned, she paused in the jetway entrance, deliberately creating a bottleneck as she continued her narration. As you can see, I'm finally boarding after being forced to wait while non-frequent travelers were given priority. She spoke into her phone. This is what happens when airlines prioritize appearance over loyal customers. Flight attendant Maria Vasquez greeted passengers at the aircraft door, her practiced smile remaining in place despite the tension radiating from Elaine. At 42, Maria had handled every type of passenger situation imaginable in her 15 years with Skylink. Welcome aboard, Ms. Whitfield. Your seat is 2A, window seat on the right side, Maria directed pleasantly. Elaine paused her recording momentarily. I need to be moved. I was just informed that I've been seated next to those people who pre-boarded. I won't be comfortable for a 3-hour flight. Maria's smile didn't waver, though her eyes hardened slightly. I'm afraid the flight is completely full in first class. Ms. Whitfield, all passengers are assigned specific seats. Then move them, Elaine insisted, her voice carrying down the aisle where the Johnson family was already settling into seats 2B and 2C. Their daughters across the aisle in 2D and 2F. Other first-class passengers watched the interaction with uncomfortable expressions. A gray-haired executive in 1D pretended sudden interest in the safety card. A middle-aged woman in 1F frowned openly at Elaine's behavior. That won't be possible, Maria replied firmly. Please take your assigned seat so we can continue the boarding process. This is completely unacceptable, Elaine declared, resuming her recording. I'm being forced to sit next to people who will make my expensive first-class experience uncomfortable. Ma'am, Maria's voice dropped lower. Our non-discrimination policy is very clear. If you're uncomfortable with your assigned seat companions for reasons related to race or ethnicity, perhaps this isn't the right flight for you. Are you threatening to remove me? A Platinum Elite member? Elaine's voice rose sharply. I never mentioned race. You're the one discriminating against me now. Behind her, the boarding line grew as passengers waited to enter the aircraft. Whispers and uncomfortable glances traveled through the queue. Kevin approached from the gate. Is there an issue here? Maria. Miss Whitfield is reluctant to take her assigned seat. Maria explained professionally. I'm reluctant to sit next to disruptive passengers. Elaine corrected, camera still recording. These people have already caused problems at the gate, and they'll ruin my flight. Mr. Johnson looked up from helping his daughter with her seatbelt. Excuse me, but we haven't spoken a single word to you. My family is simply trying to board our flight. See, they're confrontational, Elaine declared triumphantly to her camera. This is exactly what I was concerned about. The absurdity of her statement wasn't lost on the surrounding passengers. The man in 1A, a physician judging by the medical conference materials he was reviewing, shook his head in visible disgust. First Officer Diana Morales appeared in the cockpit doorway, observing the situation while pretending to check instrumentation. Her presence, uniform crisp and authority clear, was a deliberate show of crew solidarity. Ms. Whitfield, you need to take your seat or return to the terminal, Kevin stated firmly. You're delaying the boarding process for everyone? Fine, but I want it on record that I'm being forced to endure an uncomfortable situation. Elaine finally moved to her seat, continuing to narrate to her followers. This is what happens when airlines prioritize political correctness over customer loyalty. As she settled into 2A, she immediately reclined her seat to its full extent and spread her belongings across the shared armrest, a passive-aggressive claim to territory. Then she turned her camera toward the Johnson family. Look at how they've allowed their children to disrupt the first-class cabin already, she commented, though the twins were sitting perfectly quietly, reading books from their backpacks. Mrs. Johnson reached across the aisle. Excuse me, but please don't film my children. They're minors, and I don't consent to their images being used on your social media. This is a public space, Elaine retorted. I'm documenting my travel experience. Aircraft are not public spaces, Kevin interjected, having overheard the exchange. And Skylink policy prohibits recording other passengers without consent, especially minors. I'll need to ask you to stop filming Ms. Whitfield. This is ridiculous, Elaine protested, but reluctantly lowered her phone. My followers deserve to see how I'm being treated. As boarding continued, Elaine's complaints became increasingly vocal. When the Johnson twins quietly discussed their books across the aisle, she loudly commented on disruptive behavior. When Mr. Johnson requested apple juice for his daughters, she muttered about these people always wanting special treatment. The comments were clearly audible, but carefully constructed to maintain plausible deniability about their racist intent. The practiced precision of her language suggested this wasn't her first time deploying such tactics. By now, multiple passengers had activated their phone's recording functions. The man in the Yale sweatshirt, seated in 3A directly behind Elaine, captured her continuous commentary. An older woman in 4B discreetly positioned her phone to record the interactions. The incident was being documented from multiple angles, creating a comprehensive record that would later prove crucial. In the main cabin, awareness of the situation spread through whispered conversations and concerned glances toward first class. A flight attendant briefly explained to a questioning passenger that there was a customer service issue being addressed. From the cockpit, Captain Reynolds monitored the situation through updates from his crew. The decision point was approaching rapidly. FAA regulations and company policy gave him clear authority to remove disruptive passengers, but such actions were not taken lightly. Each minute of delay impacted connection times for the 115 passengers aboard, many of whom had tight connections in Chicago. The final boarding announcement echoed through the gate area. In 30 minutes, they were scheduled to push back from the gate. Outside the windows, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, an approaching storm system that threatened to complicate the day's flight operations. As the last passengers settled into their seats, Elaine's behavior showed no signs of improvement. Instead, her comments grew bolder, her tone more entitled. The Johnsons maintained their dignity, focusing on their daughters rather than their antagonist, but the tension in their posture revealed the emotional toll of Elaine's continued harassment. Kevin exchanged a meaningful glance with Maria. Both recognized the warning signs of a passenger whose behavior would likely escalate once they were airborne. With limited options at 37,000 feet, decisions needed to be made while they were still at the gate. Diana Morales stepped out of the cockpit again, this time with a deliberate message for the cabin crew. Captain Reynolds would like an update on our boarding status and any passenger concerns before we finalize our departure preparations. The subtle communication confirmed what the experienced crew already knew. Their captain was monitoring the situation and prepared to take action if necessary. For now, they would continue to follow procedure, documenting each interaction meticulously while attempting to manage Elaine's behavior. What none of them yet realized was that this routine Friday morning flight was about to become anything but ordinary. Initial crew response. "I'd like to speak to whoever's actually in charge here," Elaine demanded as Kevin attempted to complete the first-class beverage service. Not just flight attendants, but someone with real authority. Kevin maintained his professional demeanor despite the deliberate insult. "Captain Reynolds is preparing for our departure. If you have concerns, I'm happy to address them." "I doubt you have the authority to fix this situation," Elaine replied, gesturing dismissively toward the Johnson family. "These people are ruining the first-class experience I paid for." The little one keeps turning pages in her book too loudly. The little one in question, 10-year-old Zoe Johnson, was reading silently, her finger occasionally tracing words on the page of her science book. Her twin sister Amara was equally quiet, headphones on as she watched an educational program on the seatback screen. Maria approached with the cabin phone. "Kevin, could I speak with you for a moment?" The request was a standard crew communication tactic, allowing them to discuss the escalating situation away from passengers. Near the galley, Maria kept her voice low. "This is getting worse. She's now complaining about a child turning pages too loudly." "I know," Kevin replied, keeping his back to the cabin while maintaining situational awareness through peripheral vision. "I've started documentation for a possible removal. She's exhibited discriminatory behavior toward the Johnson family since pre-boarding." Diana asked for an update. "The captain is concerned about having her on board for 3 hours if she's already this disruptive at the gate." Kevin nodded. "Tell them I'm preparing a full briefing. We've got multiple witnesses, and at least 3 passengers are recording everything." In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds and First Officer Morales completed their pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. Despite the routine nature of their preparations, both remained acutely aware of the situation developing in the cabin. "Ground control shows storms building near our arrival time," Diana noted, updating their weather information. "Nothing severe, but we might need to adjust our approach. Reynolds nodded, though his attention was partially focused on the cabin report he anticipated from Kevin. Let's plan for the Eastern approach as our primary. What's our passenger count? Full flight, 16 in first, 132 in main cabin, 115 with connections in Chicago. Reynolds absorbed this information, factoring it into his developing decision matrix. Each passenger with a connection represented additional complications if their flight was significantly delayed. The approaching weather system added another layer of complexity. And our fuel status. We're loaded with standard reserves plus an extra 45 minutes, Diana confirmed. Enough to hold or divert if needed. Reynolds checked his watch. We're scheduled to push in 18 minutes. Let me know when Kevin's ready with that cabin report. Diana understood the subtext. Captain Reynolds was gathering all relevant information before making what could be a difficult decision. His methodical approach was why flight crews requested to work with him. He considered all factors before acting, but once committed, he followed through with absolute conviction. In the first-class cabin, Elaine had shifted tactics. Rather than directly confronting the Johnson family, she now spoke loudly to surrounding passengers about declining standards and how certain passengers clearly received their tickets through some diversity program rather than earning them like regular customers. Most passengers avoided engaging, their discomfort evident in averted gazes and sudden interest in magazines or devices. The physician in 1A, however, removed his headphones and turned toward Elaine. Ma'am, I'm trying to review medical conference materials, and your commentary is far more disruptive than anything these children have done. Elaine's eyes narrowed. I have every right to express concerns about my travel experience. And I have every right to a cabin free from bigoted remarks, the physician replied evenly. Those children are behaving perfectly, which is more than I can say for certain adults. Are you calling me a bigot? Elaine's voice rose sharply. I'll have you know I sit on 3 diversity committees. I'm simply concerned about proper first-class etiquette. The physician returned to his materials without further comment, but the exchange had been noted by surrounding passengers and captured on multiple recording devices. Kevin returned to the cabin, approaching Elaine with a deliberately calm demeanor. Ms. Whitfield, I need to inform you that we've received multiple complaints about your comments. Skylink has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Discriminatory? That's ridiculous. I'm the one being discriminated against as a loyal customer. She gestured toward the passengers recording her. And now I'm being harassed by other passengers filming me without consent. As I mentioned earlier, recording is against our policy. I'll address that separately, Kevin assured her. However, your comments about the Johnson family have been ongoing since pre-boarding and constitute a violation of our passenger conduct guidelines. I want to speak to the captain immediately, Elaine demanded. This is completely unacceptable. Kevin maintained his composure. Captain Reynolds is completing critical pre-departure procedures. I'm authorized to address passenger conduct issues. Well, you're doing a terrible job of it, Elaine snapped. These people shouldn't even be in first class, and now you're targeting me for stating the obvious. The deliberate volume of her complaint ensured it carried throughout the forward cabin. Mrs. Johnson visibly tensed but continued reading with her daughter, a practiced response to public humiliation that spoke volumes about previous experiences. Kevin leaned closer, lowering his voice. Ms. Whitfield, this is a final warning. Further discriminatory comments will result in your removal from this flight. I'd like to see you try, Elaine retorted, confidence born from years of similar confrontations where her status had shielded her from consequences. I'll have your job before this plane even takes off. In the galley, Maria documented the exchange in the electronic incident report system. Such reports would typically be reviewed after the flight, but in cases of potential removal, they were transmitted to the captain in real time. The cabin interphone buzzed. Diana's voice came through when Maria answered. Captain Reynolds requests a full cabin status report immediately. Understood. Kevin will bring it personally. In the cockpit, Reynolds reviewed the automated portion of the incident report that had already populated on his tablet. The timestamps created a clear timeline of escalating behavior. Multiple passenger complaints had been logged. The documented language showed a clear pattern of discriminatory intent despite Elaine's careful avoidance of explicit slurs. His responsibility was clear: the safety and well-being of all passengers and crew. FAA regulations gave him final authority over all aspects of the flight, including passenger conduct. Skylink's own policies reinforced this authority with specific guidelines about discriminatory behavior. Diana returned the radio to standby after confirming their departure slot with ground control. Kevin's on his way up with the full report. We're still scheduled to push back in 12 minutes. Reynolds nodded, his decision framework taking shape. 22 years of command experience had taught him to balance multiple factors: passenger safety, operational considerations, company policies, and fundamental human dignity. Let's review our options, he said as they waited for Kevin's arrival. We can remove the disruptive passenger, which means at minimum a 20-minute delay for paperwork and baggage retrieval, plus the storm system moving in, Diana added. Any delay puts us closer to potential weather issues on arrival. Alternatively, we proceed with her on board, knowing her behavior is likely to worsen once we're airborne with limited intervention options. Both pilots understood the complexity of the situation. Removing a passenger, especially a Platinum Elite member, would trigger extensive documentation requirements and potential corporate scrutiny. Proceeding with a passenger already exhibiting discriminatory behavior risked escalation at 37,000 feet, where options became significantly more limited. A gentle knock preceded Kevin's entry to the cockpit. His expression remained professional, but the tension around his eyes spoke volumes. Captain, we have an ongoing situation with passenger Elaine Whitfield in 2A. She's made multiple discriminatory comments toward the Johnson family since pre-boarding, has refused to stop despite 3 warnings, and is now demanding to speak with you directly. Reynolds reviewed the complete incident report on his tablet. What's your assessment of her potential and behavior during flight? Based on my observation and previous experiences with this passenger, I believe the situation will escalate once we're airborne. She's already ignored multiple crew instructions and shown increasing hostility. Reynolds processed this information, adding it to his decision matrix. You've documented all interactions according to protocol. Yes, sir. We have electronic records of each incident, plus at least 3 passengers have recorded her behavior independently. Thank you, Kevin. Please inform Ms. Whitfield that I'll be addressing the cabin shortly. As Kevin returned to the cabin, Reynolds turned to Diana. Let's request a short delay from ground control. Tell them we're addressing a passenger issue. Diana nodded, reaching for the radio to inform the tower of their status change. She'd flown with Reynolds long enough to recognize when he'd reached a decision point. Outside the cockpit windows, the ground crew continued preparations for their departure. Luggage loaded, fuel topped off, catering complete. All technical aspects were ready for an on-time departure. Only the human element remained unresolved. Reynolds removed his hat, smoothed his uniform, and prepared to enter the cabin. After 22 years as a commercial pilot and 4 years in the Air Force before that, he understood that some moments defined a career, and some defined a person's character. This might well be both. Captain's first intervention. Captain Marcus Reynolds stepped into the first-class cabin, his presence immediately commanding attention. At 6 feet 2 inches with perfectly pressed uniform and the calm confidence of a veteran pilot, he created an immediate impression of authority without saying a word. Good morning, he addressed the cabin, voice carrying clearly without being unnecessarily loud. I'm Captain Reynolds. I understand we have some concerns about our flight environment today. Elaine Whitfield straightened in her seat, satisfaction evident in her expression. She'd demanded authority, and now the highest authority on the aircraft stood before her. Finally, she declared loudly, Captain, your flight attendants have been completely unhelpful. I've been subjected to disruptive behavior and then threatened for simply expressing concerns. Reynolds maintained a neutral expression. I see. Could you clarify which behaviors you found disruptive? Elaine gestured toward the Johnson family. These people and their children don't understand first-class etiquette. They've been noisy and disruptive since boarding. The accusation was absurd to anyone who had observed the Johnson family's quiet dignity throughout the confrontation. The twins remained perfectly behaved, their parents maintaining composed expressions despite the ongoing humiliation. Reynolds glanced briefly at the Johnson family, noting their calm demeanor and the obvious care they'd taken to prepare their daughters for the flight with books and quiet activities. I've reviewed the cabin reports, Ms. Whitfield. They indicate that you've made several comments about these people not belonging in first class. Is that accurate? I never mentioned race, if that's what you're implying, Elaine replied defensively. I'm concerned about behavior, not appearance. You're twisting my words. I didn't mention race either, Miss Whitfield, Reynolds noted calmly. But I am concerned about respectful treatment of all our passengers. Skylink's policies are very clear about creating a welcoming environment. Are you really the captain? Elaine asked suddenly, eyes narrowing as she studied his name badge and uniform. You seem more like someone they sent to handle customer complaints. The implication was clear to everyone listening. Several passengers inhaled sharply at the thinly veiled insinuation that Reynolds couldn't possibly be the actual pilot because of his race. Reynolds maintained his composure, having encountered similar skepticism throughout his career. Yes, I am. Captain Marcus Reynolds, senior pilot with Skylink Airlines. I've been flying commercially for 22 years, with 4 years of Air Force service before that. Elaine's momentary surprise quickly transformed back into entitlement. Well, as the captain, surely you understand that premium customers deserve certain considerations. I've been Platinum Elite for 9 years. All passengers deserve respect regardless of status. Ms. Whitfield. Reynolds' tone remained professional, but carried unmistakable authority. Our first-class service provides wider seats, premium meals, and priority boarding, not exemption from basic courtesy toward fellow travelers. The physician in 1A nodded approvingly. Several other passengers watched the interaction with evident relief that the situation was being addressed. I'm being singled out for expressing legitimate concerns, Elaine protested, voice rising. This is about customer service, not whatever you're implying. No one is being singled out. Ms. Whitfield, we're simply enforcing our standard conduct policies that apply equally to all passengers. Reynolds maintained eye contact, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Elaine's growing agitation. I need your assurance that you can interact respectfully with all passengers and crew for the duration of our flight. So I'm expected to just sit here while my first-class experience is ruined, Elaine demanded incredulously. You're expected to treat fellow passengers with basic courtesy. Yes. Reynolds' reply was matter of fact. If that's not possible, we'll need to make alternative arrangements for your travel today. The implicit warning was clear. Elaine's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, anger, calculation, before settling into a thin-lipped smile. Fine, I'll be the bigger person here. Thank you for your cooperation. Reynolds turned to address the entire cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we're completing our final preparations for departure to Chicago O'Hare. We appreciate your patience during this brief delay. As he turned to return to the cockpit, Elaine muttered just loudly enough to be heard, "Affirmative action pilot playing power games?" Perfect. Reynolds paused momentarily, then continued toward the cockpit without acknowledging the comment. The damage, however, was done. The racial implication had been explicit enough that several passengers gasped audibly. Mr. Johnson's jaw tightened visibly as he squeezed his wife's hand. Kevin, standing at the galley partition, had heard the comment clearly. He immediately noted it in the ongoing incident report, adding it to the mounting documentation of Elaine's behavior. In the cockpit, Reynolds settled back into the left seat, his exterior composure intact despite the confrontation. How did it go? Diana asked, though the question was largely rhetorical. Through the cockpit door, they'd both heard Elaine's parting comment. About as expected. She's agreed to behave appropriately, but I doubt it will last beyond takeoff. Reynolds checked his watch. Let's proceed with departure preparations for now. We're currently running 8 minutes behind schedule. Diana nodded, understanding the complex calculation Reynolds was making. Removing a passenger now meant significant delay, but proceeding with Elaine on board carried its own risks. Ground control has extended our departure window by 12 minutes, she reported. Tower understands we're managing a passenger situation. Reynolds completed his pre-flight checklist methodically. His movements precise, despite the additional pressure. The approaching weather system, connection times for 115 passengers, and company expectations for on-time performance already factored into his developing decision. In the cabin, Elaine had resumed her commentary, though now in a stage whisper directed primarily at the passenger across the aisle in 2E, an older white woman who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the one-sided conversation. Can you believe this? They're clearly trying to intimidate me because I dared to speak up. That pilot probably got his job through some diversity program rather than actual qualifications. The woman in 2E shifted away, pretending sudden interest in the safety card. Behind Elaine Van Dyne, the man in the yellow sweatshirt continued recording discreetly, capturing each inflammatory comment. Miss Johnson leaned across to her daughters. Why don't we play our quiet word game? First one to find all 50 states in the magazine wins. The simple redirection was clearly practiced, a parent's strategy for protecting children from the ugliness of adult prejudice. The twins eagerly began scanning their magazines, temporarily distracted from the tension surrounding them. Kevin approached with pre-departure beverages for first class. When he reached Elaine, she made a show of inspecting her champagne glass for cleanliness. I hope you've actually washed these properly. Standards seem to be slipping everywhere on this flight. All our glassware is sanitized according to FDA regulations, Ms. Whitfield, Kevin replied professionally, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed his growing frustration. As the final preparations for departure continued, the cabin settled into an uneasy calm. The confrontation had temporarily subsided, but everyone, passengers and crew alike, sensed that Elaine was merely regrouping rather than truly complying. In the cockpit, Reynolds completed his communication with ground control and reviewed their departure clearance. The decision point was approaching rapidly. Once they pushed back from the gate, options would become more limited. Diana glanced at him sideways. We're cleared for pushback whenever you're ready. Captain. Reynolds nodded, weighing all factors one final time. Then he reached for the cabin interphone. Kevin, please provide a final cabin status report before departure. The seemingly routine request was actually a critical decision point. Reynolds was giving his cabin crew one last opportunity to recommend action before they left the gate. Kevin's response was prompt and professional, but the subtext was clear. Captain, we have an ongoing situation that may require your attention before departure. Reynolds exchanged a meaningful glance with Diana. They both understood that the next few minutes would determine whether Flight 1742 departed with 148 passengers or 147. Part 2, the decision point. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. Our departure is temporarily delayed while we address some final details. We appreciate your patience and expect to be underway shortly. The standard announcement masked the critical situation developing in the first-class cabin. Passengers checked watches and phones, calculating connection times and sending quick messages before the expected departure. Elaine Whitfield seized the delay as an opportunity to escalate her complaints. See, now we're all being delayed because they spent so much time catering to certain passengers instead of focusing on departure. The connection between her statement and reality was non-existent, but several passengers shifted uncomfortably at the increasingly hostile atmosphere she was creating. Kevin approached Elaine's seat. Ms. Whitfield, I need to remind you again about our passenger conduct policy. Your comments continue to create a disruptive environment. I'm simply expressing concern about our delay, Elaine replied with feigned innocence. You're targeting me because I'm the only one willing to speak the truth around here. Across the aisle, Zoe Johnson looked up from her magazine, confusion evident in her young face. Mom, why is that lady so angry? Mrs. Johnson maintained her composure, though the pain of having her child exposed to such hatred was evident in her eyes. Some people have trouble managing their emotions. Sweetheart, it's not about us. The simple explanation, protective yet honest, spoke volumes about the conversations Black parents were forced to have with their children. Mr. Johnson reached across to squeeze his daughter's hand, a gesture of reassurance that carried the weight of countless similar moments. Elaine snorted audibly. Now they're talking about me to their children. This is harassment. The accusation was so obviously reversed that several nearby passengers exchanged incredulous glances. The physician in 1A shook his head in visible disgust before addressing Elaine directly. Ma'am, with all due respect, you've been harassing that family since before boarding. They've shown remarkable restraint in the face of your behavior. Excuse me, Elaine's voice rose sharply. I don't know who you think you are, but I'm a valued customer expressing legitimate concerns. I think I'm someone who recognizes racist behavior when I see it, the physician replied calmly. And as a fellow first-class passenger, your conduct is the only thing diminishing my experience today. Elaine gasped theatrically. How dare you call me racist? I have many Black friends. I donate to urban education programs every year. The defensive response only reinforced the physician's point. Several passengers had now turned to watch the confrontation, and recordings continued from multiple angles. The incident was being thoroughly documented from every perspective. In the back of the aircraft, awareness of the situation had spread through whispered conversations. Passengers in the main cabin craned necks, trying to glimpse the source of the delay. Flight attendants maintained professional demeanors while exchanging meaningful glances that communicated their shared concern. Social media was already amplifying the incident beyond the aircraft. Passengers with pre-takeoff internet access shared initial details. Travel Truth 27. Sitting on hashtag Skylink 1742, watching a woman harass a black family in first class, Captain already had to come out once. Hashtag flight delayed. Hashtag racism, business traveler. 365. Platinum member on my flight throwing tantrum because black family seated in first class, claiming they don't belong while their kids behave perfectly. Hashtag Skylink racism. Chicago commuter. Can't believe what I'm seeing on flight to Ordite. Woman openly making racist comments while filming black passengers without consent. Crew trying to handle professionally. The hashtag Skylink racism had begun trending in Atlanta, with initial engagement expanding rapidly as aviation and travel accounts picked up the developing story. Kevin returned to the galley to update the incident report, adding the latest confrontation to the documentation. Maria approached with the cabin phone. Captain Reynolds wants another update. The tower is asking about our delay status. Kevin took the phone, voice low but tension evident. Captain, the situation is escalating. Whitfield has now directly confronted another passenger who called out her behavior, and she's made additional comments toward the Johnson family. In the cockpit, Reynolds processed this information while reviewing weather updates on his display. The approaching storm system had accelerated, potentially impacting their arrival window in Chicago. Every minute of delay increased the likelihood of weather complications. Understood. Kevin, I'll be out shortly. Please continue documentation protocol. Reynolds turned to Diana after disconnecting. The situation's deteriorating. We need to make a final decision before pushback. Diana nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. Tower's getting anxious about our departure slot. If we delay much longer, we might lose our position in the sequence. Reynolds glanced at the operational data on his screen. 115 passengers with connections. Storms approaching Chicago. Schedule pressures from the company. All significant factors, but none outweighing the fundamental issue at hand, the dignity and safety of everyone on his aircraft. Let's request a formal delay from the tower. Tell them we're addressing a potential passenger removal situation. Diana nodded, reaching for the radio to communicate their status change. The formal notification would trigger additional procedures, including potential involvement from ground operations and customer service personnel. In the cabin, Elaine had redirected her attention back to the Johnson family, her comments becoming increasingly pointed despite attempting to maintain plausible deniability. I just think some people need to understand that first class has certain expectations. It's not just about having a ticket, it's about belonging in the environment. The emphasis she placed on belonging made her meaning unmistakable. Mr. Johnson maintained his dignity, though the tension in his jaw revealed the emotional toll of the ongoing situation. Mrs. Johnson continued engaging with their daughters, creating a protective bubble of normalcy amid the hostility. The twins, however, were becoming increasingly aware of the tension despite their parents' efforts. Amara whispered something to her sister, both girls glancing nervously at Elaine before returning to their activities. Maria approached with a determined expression. Ms. Whitfield, I need to inform you that we've received multiple complaints about your behavior from surrounding passengers. This is a final warning before we take further action. Complaints about me. Elaine's indignation appeared genuinely shocked, revealing a profound disconnect between her behavior and her self-perception. I'm the victim here. I've been seated next to disruptive passengers and then harassed by your staff and other customers for expressing concerns. The only disruption in this cabin is coming from you. Ma'am, came a voice from behind. The man in the yellow sweatshirt leaned forward slightly. I've been recording your behavior since boarding because it was so obviously inappropriate. You have no right to record me. Elaine twisted in her seat to confront him. That's an invasion of privacy. Actually, I do have that right when you're harassing other passengers in my presence, he replied calmly. I'm a civil rights attorney, and what you're doing meets the legal definition of harassment based on protected characteristics. The revelation sent a ripple of reaction through nearby passengers. Elaine's expression flickered momentarily before hardening into defensive anger. This is ridiculous. I'm being ganged up on for expressing legitimate customer concerns. Before the situation could escalate further, Captain Reynolds reappeared in the cabin, his presence immediately commanding attention. He'd removed his hat, holding it formally at his side, a subtle indication that this was now a formal intervention rather than a casual check-in. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the continuing delay. We're working to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. He turned to address Elaine directly. Ms. Whitfield, I'd like to speak with you privately for a moment. Anything you need to say, you can say right here, Elaine replied, clearly preferring an audience for the confrontation. As you wish. Reynolds' tone remained professional. I've been informed of continued disruptive behavior despite previous warnings. Before we proceed with our departure, I need to determine whether you can comply with our passenger conduct policies for the duration of this flight. I've done nothing wrong, Elaine insisted. I'm being targeted for speaking up about legitimate concerns. Making repeated comments about other passengers not belonging in first class based on their race is not a legitimate concern. Ms. Whitfield, it's discriminatory behavior that violates airline policy and federal aviation regulations. The directness of his statement left no room for Elaine's previous strategy of implication and deniability. Several passengers nodded in approval of the captain's clear communication. I never mentioned race, Elaine protested, voice rising sharply. You're putting words in my mouth. This is defamation. Reynolds remained unruffled by the accusation. Ms. Whitfield, we have documented multiple instances where you've expressed that the Johnson family doesn't belong in first class despite having valid tickets, requested they be moved despite no disruptive behavior on their part, and made comments implying they received their tickets through some diversity program rather than earning them like regular customers. These statements have clear discriminatory intent. Elaine's face flushed with anger. So now customer feedback is discriminatory. This is exactly what's wrong with airlines today. Actual paying customers get treated like criminals while others get special treatment. All our first-class passengers are actual paying customers. Ms. Whitfield, Reynolds replied evenly, including the Johnson family. The simplicity of the statement highlighted the absurdity of Elaine's position. Several passengers nodded in agreement, while others continued recording the interaction. I want your name and employee ID number, Elaine demanded, reaching for her phone. My followers need to know about this treatment. Are you even qualified to fly this plane? Or did you also get your position through some diversity initiative? The question hung in the air, its racist implication unmistakable to everyone listening. Gasps came from several passengers. Mrs. Johnson covered her daughter's ears, though the twins had already heard enough to understand the ugliness being displayed. Reynolds' expression remained composed, though something flickered briefly in his eyes, perhaps the weight of similar questions faced throughout his career, or perhaps simple determination. Captain Marcus Reynolds, employee ID 8734291. And to answer your question directly, I earned my position through 22 years of exemplary service, including 4 years as an Air Force pilot before joining commercial aviation. His calm professionalism in the face of Elaine's hostility only highlighted the contrast between them. Passengers watched with a mixture of discomfort and admiration as Reynolds maintained his composure despite the obvious provocation. I need to inform you, Ms. Whitfield, that questioning a pilot's qualifications based on race violates federal aviation regulations regarding interference with crew members. This is now a formal incident that will require documentation and potential follow-up from regulatory authorities. The official language served notice that the situation had escalated beyond a simple customer service issue. Reynolds turned to address the broader cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this continued delay. We'll be making a final determination about our departure shortly. Thank you for your patience. As he turned to return to the cockpit, the significance of the moment was clear to everyone watching. What had begun as one passenger's discriminatory behavior had evolved into a defining moment for everyone on board Flight 1742. In the main cabin, passengers exchanged uncertain glances. The approaching storm visible through the windows seemed an appropriate metaphor for the tension building within the aircraft. On phones throughout the cabin, the hashtag Skylink racism continued gaining momentum, the incident expanding beyond the confines of the Boeing 737 into public consciousness. No one yet realized that Captain Reynolds' next decision would transform this routine Friday morning flight into a watershed moment that would reverberate throughout the airline industry. Captain's assessment: in the confined privacy of the cockpit, Captain Reynolds settled into the left seat, his exterior composure intact despite the confrontation. First Officer Diana Morales watched him carefully, recognizing the weight of the decision now resting on his shoulders. "We need to make the call," Reynolds said quietly, reviewing the incident documentation on his tablet. "The situation is deteriorating, and I don't see it improving once we're airborne." Diana nodded, understanding the complexity of the factors in play. "What's your assessment?" Reynolds scrolled through the electronic report, which now contained timestamps, direct quotes, and witness statements collected by the cabin crew. "Ms. Whitfield has made explicitly discriminatory comments, refused multiple warnings, questioned my qualifications based on race, and created a hostile environment for the Johnson family and surrounding passengers. Clear grounds for removal under company policy," Diana observed. "Yes, but we need to consider all factors." Reynolds pulled up the flight information display. "We have 115 passengers with connections in Chicago. Removing her means minimum 30-minute delay for paperwork and baggage retrieval. The weather system's advancing faster than forecast. We'll be cutting it close for our arrival window, even if we depart now." The professional discussion masked a deeper, more personal calculation that Reynolds was processing internally. 22 years in commercial aviation had taught him to compartmentalize, to separate emotion from operational decisions. But some situations transcended the strictly professional. His mind flashed briefly to a memory from decades earlier. His father, Thomas Reynolds, one of the first black commercial pilots for a major airline in the 1980s, sitting at their kitchen table after a particularly difficult flight. "They made me walk through the cabin 3 times. Marcus," his father had said quietly. 3 times in uniform, because a passenger refused to believe a black man was actually the captain. Said they wouldn't fly if I was in command. "What did you do?" Dad, 14-year-old Marcus had asked. "I flew that plane perfectly," Thomas Reynolds had replied, a sad smile crossing his face. "Just like every other flight. Excellence is our only option, son. Remember that." The memory dissolved as quickly as it had formed, but its impact remained. Reynolds refocused on the immediate situation, the lessons of his father's generation informing but not dictating his decision. There's also the promotion consideration. Diana noted carefully, Reynolds was being evaluated for advancement to chief pilot next month, a fact known to the entire flight crew. Removing a platinum elite passenger won't make corporate happy. Reynolds nodded, acknowledging the career implications without giving them undue weight. "True, but that's not the deciding factor here." "What is?" Diana asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Dignity," Reynolds replied simply. "The dignity of the Johnson family. The dignity of every passenger who expects to travel without being subjected to discrimination. And ultimately, the dignity of our profession." Diana nodded, respect evident in her expression. "For what it's worth, I support whatever decision you make." "Thank you." Reynolds turned his attention back to the operational data. "Let's consider our options methodically." Together, they worked through the decision matrix with professional precision. Option 1 removed the Elaine Whitfield for discriminatory behavior. Pros: enforces clear standards of conduct, protects Johnson family from further harassment, demonstrates commitment to dignity for all passengers. Cons: minimum 30-minute departure delay, potential missed connections, career implications for crew, possible corporate backlash. Option 2: proceed with departure with Elaine on board. Pros: maintain schedule, avoid immediate disruption, satisfy corporate on-time performance metrics. Cons: high probability of escalation during flight with limited intervention options at altitude. Continued harassment of Johnson family. Precedent that discriminatory behavior is tolerable. Option 3: attempt to reseat passengers to separate Elaine from the Johnson family. Pros: potential de-escalation without removal. Minimal departure delay. Cons: first class fully booked. Moving Johnson family would reward discriminatory behavior. Message that harassment results in accommodation. Reynolds studied each option carefully, weighing not just the immediate operational factors, but the broader implications. His decision would send a message to his crew, to the passengers on board, and ultimately to the company about what was truly important in commercial aviation. The radio crackled with an update from the tower. Skylink 1742, be advised we need a status update on your delay. We're holding your departure slot for 5 more minutes, then you'll need to request a new clearance time. Diana responded professionally while Reynolds continued his assessment. The pressure was mounting from all sides: operations, scheduling, approaching weather, passenger connections. But the central issue remained unchanged. Kevin, Reynolds called the lead flight attendant on the interphone. Final situation assessment, please. Captain, the situation continues to deteriorate. Ms. Whitfield is now openly claiming you received your position through affirmative action rather than qualifications. She's using her phone to message her followers despite instructions to stop. The Johnson family remains composed, but their children are visibly distressed. Understood. Stand by for final decision. Reynolds turned to Diana after disconnecting. We can't allow this to continue at 37,000 feet. Agreed. The safety implications alone justify intervention. Crew distraction, passenger anxiety, potential for physical confrontation, all significant risk factors. Reynolds nodded, his decision crystallizing. There's also the Johnson family to consider. Those children shouldn't be subjected to 3 hours of this behavior. No, they shouldn't, Diana agreed quietly. Reynolds checked the time. 4 minutes until their departure slot expired. The decision point had arrived. We're removing her, he said with a quiet finality. Prepare the appropriate notifications to the tower and operations. I'll address the cabin. Diana nodded, reaching for the radio to inform the tower of their status change. Skylink 1742 requesting official delay for passenger removal procedure. We'll need a new departure clearance. As she coordinated with ground control, Reynolds prepared for what would likely be the most significant public stance of his career. The corporate implications were clear. Removing a Platinum Elite member would trigger intense scrutiny, potentially impacting his promotion prospects. But some principles transcended career considerations. He straightened his uniform, replaced his captain's hat, and prepared to re-enter the cabin. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same dignity he sought to defend. The watershed moment. I paid $3,000 for this first-class ticket. Elaine Whitfield's voice carried throughout the forward cabin as Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit. These people probably use points or some diversity voucher program. They don't value the experience the way actual paying customers do. The comment, clearly audible to everyone in the first 6 rows, crossed a line that even Elaine's previous statements hadn't. Several passengers gasped audibly. The physician in 1A removed his headphones entirely, his expression darkening. The civil rights attorney in 3A adjusted his phone to ensure he captured every word. Mrs. Johnson's hands trembled slightly as she helped her daughter with a book, the only visible sign of the emotional toll this continuous harassment had taken. Mr. Johnson sat perfectly still, his jaw tight, maintaining his dignity through practiced restraint. Furthermore, Elaine continued, addressing surrounding passengers as though conducting a seminar on customer rights. I have serious concerns about whether we have a properly qualified pilot. I think we deserve a different pilot who actually knows what they're doing, not someone who probably got fast-tracked through training to meet some quota. The racist implication was no longer veiled, but explicitly stated. Kevin, who had been documenting the escalating situation, looked up sharply at the direct attack on the captain's qualifications. Maria, restocking the galley, froze in place. Water bottle halfway to the cart. Captain Reynolds paused in the doorway, having heard the entire statement. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face, perhaps pain, perhaps determination, before his professional demeanor returned. He stepped fully into the cabin, standing tall in his perfectly pressed uniform with 4 gold stripes gleaming on each sleeve. The cabin fell silent as passengers registered his presence. Elaine, initially unaware, continued her commentary until the sudden quiet made her turn. Seeing Reynolds standing there, she faltered momentarily before lifting her chin defiantly. Perfect timing. I was just explaining to everyone that we have serious concerns about the flight leadership. I heard your concerns quite clearly. Miss Whitfield. Reynolds' voice was calm but carried naturally throughout the silent cabin. He stood at perfect attention, his posture reflecting years of military discipline before his commercial aviation career. Ladies and gentlemen, he addressed the entire cabin. I'm Captain Marcus Reynolds. I've been a commercial pilot for 22 years, with over 16,000 flight hours and a perfect safety record. Before joining Skylink, I served as an Air Force pilot with the 58th Fighter Squadron. I hold an aerospace engineering degree from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and I currently serve on the Federal Aviation Administration's Passenger Conduct Advisory Committee. The simple recitation of credentials silenced Elaine momentarily. Reynolds continued, his voice measured but carrying unmistakable authority. Aviation safety depends on multiple factors: mechanical systems, weather conditions, and perhaps most importantly, human factors. A harmonious cabin environment is not just about comfort, it's about safety. Discriminatory behavior creates stress, distracts crew members, and compromises our ability to focus completely on our primary mission, getting you safely to your destination. Passengers throughout the cabin had fallen completely silent, many recording the unprecedented address. In the main cabin, flight attendants stood in the aisles, allowing Reynolds' voice to carry to the back rows. Skylink Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. This isn't just corporate policy. It reflects fundamental FAA regulations about passenger conduct and crew authority. Reynolds maintained perfect eye contact with Elaine as he spoke. These policies exist because at 37,000 feet, we're a community dependent on mutual respect and cooperation. He paused, allowing his words to register throughout the aircraft. Since boarding began 37 minutes ago, we've documented multiple incidents of discriminatory behavior directed toward the Johnson family. These incidents have continued despite 3 separate warnings from our professional cabin crew. Elaine interrupted, her voice sharp with indignation. This is ridiculous. I've simply expressed concerns about the declining standards in first class. You're twisting my words because I dared to question your authority. Reynolds remained composed despite the interruption. Miss Whitfield, you've made specific comments about the Johnson family not belonging in first class despite their valid tickets. You've suggested they received their seats through some diversity program rather than earning them like regular customers. You've complained about their children's behavior, despite those children being exceptionally well-behaved. He glanced briefly toward the twins, who watched wide-eyed as the captain defended their family. And most recently, you've questioned my professional qualifications based solely on my race, suggesting I received my position through fast tracking or quotas rather than my documented experience and credentials. The methodical recitation of evidence left Elaine temporarily speechless. Reynolds turned to address the broader cabin again. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be completely transparent about where we stand. These documented behaviors violate Skylink's passenger conduct policies and federal aviation regulations. As captain, I have final authority over all aspects of this flight, including the composition of our passenger manifest. The implication was clear to everyone listening. Reynolds was building the case for Elaine's removal, meticulously establishing the grounds for his decision. I believe in second chances, he continued. We've provided multiple opportunities for correction, but the behavior has escalated rather than improved. At this point, I must consider the safety and dignity of all passengers under my care. First Officer Diana Morales appeared in the cockpit doorway, a silent show of support for the captain's stance. Her presence, uniform crisp and authority clear, reinforced that this was a unified crew decision rather than one individual's action. Before I make my final determination, Reynolds said, turning back to Elaine, I'm providing one last opportunity for you to assure me that you can and will treat all passengers and crew members with basic respect for the duration of our flight to Chicago. The cabin held its collective breath. Elaine's expression cycled through several emotions: shock at being publicly addressed, calculation of her options, and finally defiance. This is absolutely outrageous, she declared, voice rising. I'll be filing formal complaints with corporate headquarters. My followers are already documenting this entire situation. You're clearly targeting me because I dared to speak the truth about declining standards. She gestured dismissively toward the Johnson family. Anyone with eyes can see they don't fit the first-class profile. And yes, I have serious doubts about whether affirmative action hiring practices are appropriate for positions as critical as airline pilots. That's not racism, it's a legitimate safety concern. The statement, delivered with absolute conviction, revealed the depth of Elaine's prejudice. Several passengers shook their heads in visible disgust. The physician in 1A muttered something under his breath. The civil rights attorney continued recording, his expression grimly satisfied at having captured such explicit evidence. Reynolds absorbed the response with professional composure. Though the personal impact of such statements couldn't be entirely masked, he nodded once. Decision confirmed. Thank you for that clarity, Ms. Whitfield. Based on your continued discriminatory statements and unwillingness to comply with our conduct policies, I've made my decision. He turned to address the entire cabin, voice firm but not harsh. Ladies and gentlemen, as captain of this aircraft, I cannot in good conscience operate this flight under current conditions. The safety and dignity of all passengers must be my primary concern. The cabin grew perfectly still as passengers sensed the historic nature of the moment unfolding before them. Reynolds continued with unwavering conviction. Therefore, I am exercising my authority under federal aviation regulations to refuse transport to Ms. Whitfield due to discriminatory behavior that violates both airline policy and federal regulations. Elaine's mouth opened in shock. You can't do that. I'm a Platinum Elite member. Status doesn't exempt anyone from basic human decency. Miss Whitfield. Reynolds' reply was simple but powerful. Our gate agents will arrange alternative transportation for you on a later flight, contingent upon your agreement to comply with our conduct policies. Before Elaine could respond, Reynolds addressed another critical decision. Furthermore, I want to apologize to all passengers for the disruption you've experienced today. The dignity of air travel is something I take very seriously. He paused, visibly weighing his next words. After careful consideration of all factors, including the weather system approaching Chicago, the connections many of you need to make, and most importantly, the atmosphere that has been created on this aircraft, I've reached a difficult conclusion. The cabin remained silent, passengers holding their breath as they sensed a momentous announcement approaching. As your captain, I am canceling Skylink Flight 1742 to Chicago O'Hare. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. This went far beyond removing a single disruptive passenger. Reynolds was making an unprecedented statement about the values of commercial aviation itself. All passengers will be rebooked on later flights, with priority given to those with connections. Skylink will provide appropriate meal vouchers and accommodations as needed. Reynolds' voice remained steady despite the magnitude of his decision. I cannot and will not operate this aircraft when the dignity of any passenger has been compromised. You deserve better than that. We all deserve better than that. The silence that followed was profound. Then something unexpected happened. The physician in 1A began to applaud, slowly at first, then with increasing conviction. The civil rights attorney joined, then the business traveler in 4C. Within moments, applause spread throughout the cabin, passengers standing to show their support for the captain's principled stance. Mr. Johnson remained seated, but tears glistened in his eyes as he held his wife's hand. Their daughters looked around in confusion at the applause, not fully understanding the significance of what they had witnessed, but sensing that something important had happened. Elaine sat frozen in shock, her phone forgotten in her hand as she faced the reality that her behavior had consequences far beyond what she had imagined possible. Reynolds acknowledged the applause with a simple nod before continuing. Gate agents will assist with rebooking. Our crew will help you deplane in an orderly fashion. I thank you for your understanding and apologize again for the disruption to your travel plans. As he turned to return to the cockpit, First Officer Diana Morales stood at attention, a gesture of profound professional respect. Kevin and Maria, the cabin crew who had documented and managed the escalating situation, similarly straightened in silent solidarity. Reynolds paused at the cockpit door. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, please accept my personal apology for what you've experienced today. No family should ever face such treatment while traveling. Mrs. Johnson nodded, emotion evident in her expression. Thank you, Captain. Those three simple words carried the weight of countless similar experiences where no one had taken such a definitive stand. Reynolds acknowledged them with a respectful nod before disappearing into the cockpit. Behind him, he left the cabin forever changed by what they had witnessed, a moment when one person's commitment to dignity outweighed schedules, convenience, corporate metrics, and personal career considerations. As the reality of the situation settled over the passengers, phones throughout the cabin captured the aftermath. The hashtag Captain Stands Tall joint, hashtag Skylink racism on trending lists, the story spreading rapidly beyond the confines of the aircraft. No one yet understood the industry-wide implications of Reynolds' decision. This watershed moment would ultimately transform policies, practices, and expectations throughout commercial aviation. But for now, as passengers prepared to deplane, they knew they had witnessed something remarkable, a moment when the true meaning of a captain's authority had been exercised not just for safety, but for fundamental human dignity. The decision. All passengers please prepare to deplane in an orderly fashion. Gate agents will assist with rebooking and accommodation arrangements. We appreciate your cooperation during this process. Kevin's announcement echoed through the suddenly active cabin. Passengers gathered belongings, many still processing the unprecedented decision they had just witnessed. Phones throughout the aircraft captured the aftermath, social media exploding with first-hand accounts and video snippets of Captain Reynolds' historic stance. In the cockpit, Reynolds completed the formal documentation required for flight cancellation. His movements were precise and professional, despite the weight of the decision he had just made. Operations is requesting direct communication with you, Diana reported, covering her microphone briefly. Corporate headquarters is also on the line. Tell operations I'll brief them after we've ensured all passengers are properly accommodated. Reynolds replied, corporate can wait until the situation is fully resolved. Diana nodded, relaying the response while continuing shutdown procedures. Her expression revealed profound respect for Reynolds' priorities. Passengers first. Explanations to management later. The jetway reconnected to the aircraft door as gate agents prepared for deplaning. The cabin crew maintained professional demeanors despite the extraordinary circumstances, helping passengers gather belongings and providing rebooking information. Elaine Whitfield remained in her seat, expression oscillating between shock and outrage. The public repudiation, applauded by fellow passengers, had temporarily silenced her, but indignation was clearly rebuilding. This is absolutely unacceptable, she finally declared, addressing Kevin as he passed. I'll be filing formal complaints with corporate headquarters in the Department of Transportation. You can't treat Platinum Elite members this way. All necessary documentation has been completed, Miss Whitfield, Kevin replied professionally. A customer service representative will assist you with alternative travel arrangements once you've deplaned. I'm not leaving until you speak with someone from corporate, Elaine insisted, remaining firmly in her seat. Captain Reynolds needs to be held accountable for this outrageous decision. Kevin maintained his composure. Ms. Whitfield, deplaning is mandatory when a flight has been canceled. If you refuse to exit voluntarily, we'll need to request assistance from airport security. The mention of security and the public spectacle that would create finally persuaded Elaine to gather her belongings. This isn't over, she muttered, struggling with her oversized carry-on. My social media followers will make sure everyone knows how Skylink treats its premium customers. Throughout the cabin, passengers' reactions varied widely as they processed the dramatic events. Many exchanged contact information, recognizing they had shared something historically significant. The civil rights attorney distributed business cards to several witnesses, clearly preparing for potential legal follow-up. The Johnson family waited quietly for the aisle to clear, protecting their daughters from the continuing tension. Mr. Johnson helped the twins gather their books and tablets, while Mrs. Johnson arranged their carry-on items. I can't believe the captain canceled the entire flight, Zoe whispered to her sister. Was it because of the mean lady? It was because of something much more important than one mean person. Mrs. Johnson explained gently, it was about respect for everyone. The simple explanation contained profound truth that even the children could understand. Captain Reynolds hadn't merely removed a disruptive passenger. He'd made a definitive statement about human dignity that transcended operational considerations. First Officer Diana Morales emerged from the cockpit, positioning herself near the aircraft door as passengers deplaned. Her presence sent a clear message of crew unity. This had been a collective decision, not just one captain's isolated action. Thank you for your support in there, a passenger commented as he passed. That was something I never expected to see in commercial aviation. Diana nodded professionally. Captain Reynolds believes every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity. We all do. Near the middle of the deplaning queue, the physician from 1A paused beside her. I've been flying commercially for 30 years, he said quietly. That was the most principled leadership I've ever witnessed on an aircraft. Please tell Captain Reynolds that his decision made a difference today, not just for the Johnson family, but for everyone who believes in basic human decency. Diana promised to relay the message, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the emotional weight of the situation. Throughout the aircraft, similar sentiments were being expressed to cabin crew members, who accepted them with appropriate reserve while continuing to assist with the deplaning process. As the cabin gradually emptied, Kevin approached the Johnson family, who had waited for most passengers to deplane before gathering their daughters. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Captain Reynolds asked me to ensure your family receives priority rebooking on the next available flight to Chicago. Our customer service team will assist you at the gate. Thank you, Mr. Johnson replied, emotion evident in his voice despite his composed expression. Please tell Captain Reynolds we appreciate his actions today. Not everyone would have had the courage to take such a stand. As the family prepared to deplane, 10-year-old Amara looked up at Kevin with innocent curiosity. Is the captain in trouble because of us? The question, with its heartbreaking implication that the child felt somehow responsible for the situation, momentarily broke through Kevin's professional facade. He knelt to the girl's eye level. Absolutely not, sweetheart. Captain Reynolds did exactly what captains are supposed to do. He protected everyone's right to travel with dignity. He's not in trouble. He's a hero. The simple explanation brought a tentative smile to Amara's face. Mrs. Johnson squeezed Kevin's shoulder in silent gratitude as they finally moved toward the exit. In the jetway, departing passengers encountered a scene of controlled chaos. Gate agents worked frantically to rebook travelers on alternative flights. Customer service representatives distributed meal vouchers and accommodation information for those facing significant delays. Airport operations personnel consulted with Skylink staff about the unprecedented flight cancellation. Social media had already transformed the incident into a viral phenomenon. Hashtags, #CaptainStans, Tall, and #Skylink Racism competed for trending positions as first-hand accounts spread across platforms. Video clips of Reynolds' dignified address circulated widely, garnering millions of views within the first hour. Aviation watchdog, breaking Skylink captain cancels entire flight after racist passenger harasses black family in first class. Unprecedented stand for dignity in commercial aviation. #Captain Stands Tall. Travel rights now. Witnessed history today on #Skylink 1742. Captain Reynolds chose dignity over schedule when passenger made racist comments about black family and questioned his qualifications. This is leadership. Business traveler 365. Platinum Elite passenger discovered status doesn't exempt you from basic human decency today. Captain canceled entire flight rather than tolerate discrimination. Standing ovation from passengers. #Skylink Racism. #Captain Stands Tall. The corporate implications were materializing with remarkable speed. What had begun as one passenger's discriminatory behavior had evolved into a potential corporate crisis that threatened Skylink's reputation and market position. Back on the aircraft, Reynolds finally emerged from the cockpit after completing all required documentation. He paused in the now empty first-class cabin, taking a moment to process the magnitude of the decision he had made. Diana approached quietly from the galley. Corporate is still requesting immediate communication. Captain, the CEO's office has called twice. Reynolds nodded, unsurprised by the executive-level attention his decision had generated. I'll call them after we complete our incident reports. The passengers come first. The crew stands with you, Diana said simply. Every one of us. When the statement, delivered with quiet conviction, reflected the profound respect Reynolds had earned through his principled leadership. As they prepared to exit the aircraft, Kevin and Maria joined them near the door, forming a unified crew in both physical positioning and professional solidarity. Our reports are complete, Kevin confirmed. Every incident documented according to protocol, with timestamps and direct quotes. Multiple witness statements collected. Reynolds nodded appreciatively. Excellent work under difficult circumstances. I want you both to know that whatever repercussions come from this decision, they'll fall on me. not on cabin crew. With all due respect, Captain, Maria replied, we're a unified crew. Your decision was our decision. The simple statement of solidarity carried powerful meaning. Reynolds acknowledged it with a grateful nod before they exited the aircraft together, a united team walking deliberately toward whatever professional consequences awaited. None of them yet realized that their actions that morning would ultimately transform not just their own careers, but the standards and expectations of an entire industry. Part 3, Immediate Aftermath. What do you mean all flights to Chicago are full until tomorrow morning? Elaine Whitfield's voice carried across the crowded gate area. I'm a Platinum Elite member. You can't treat me like some economy passenger. Customer service representative. Michael Torres maintained professional composure despite Elaine's escalating hostility. Ms. Whitfield, we're accommodating all affected passengers as quickly as possible. The approaching weather system in Chicago has complicated rebooking options. This is absolutely outrageous. Elaine continued filming with her phone, narrating her perceived victimization for her social media followers. I've been discriminated against, publicly humiliated, and now stranded because an unqualified pilot couldn't handle legitimate customer feedback. Around her, other displaced passengers from Flight 142 exchanged uncomfortable glances. Many had witnessed her behavior on the aircraft and recognized the profound disconnect between her narrative and reality. Ma'am, please lower your voice, Michael requested calmly. We're working to accommodate everyone affected by this cancellation. Everyone else caused this situation. Elaine's volume increased rather than decreased. That family should never have been in first class. That pilot should never have been given command authority. And now I'm suffering the consequences. Nearby, the civil rights attorney who had been in seat 3A continued documenting the aftermath. This is Robert Martinez, civil rights attorney. He spoke quietly into his own phone, continuing to document discriminatory behavior by Elaine Whitfield following Flight 142 cancellation. Subject is now claiming Captain Reynolds was unqualified despite his 22 years of exemplary service. Throughout the gate area, similar recordings captured Elaine's continued tirade. The incident had expanded beyond the aircraft, becoming a fully documented case study in entitlement and discrimination. At the priority rebooking desk, the Johnson family waited quietly while gate agents arranged their travel to Chicago. The twins sat with books open, though their attention occasionally drifted to the ongoing commotion. Why is that lady still so angry? Zoe asked her father quietly. We're all missing our flights, not just her. Mr. Johnson considered the question carefully, balancing honesty with age-appropriate explanation. Some people believe their convenience is more important than other people's dignity, sweetheart. But today, someone important disagreed with that idea. The simple explanation contained profound truth that even a 10-year-old could grasp. Captain Reynolds' decision had fundamentally challenged a hierarchy that placed some passengers' comfort above others' basic dignity. Across the terminal, airport operations had activated contingency protocols for the unexpected flight cancellation. Gate agents worked frantically to rebook 148 displaced passengers. Customer service representatives distributed meal vouchers and hotel accommodations for those facing overnight delays. Baggage handlers retrieved checked luggage for redistribution. Behind the service counter, Supervisor Rachel Kennedy spoke urgently into her phone. Yes, I understand this is unprecedented. We have 148 passengers to rebook with limited options to Chicago due to the approaching weather system. We need additional staff immediately. The operational challenges were significant, but equally pressing was the narrative rapidly spreading through social media. Airport Communications Director Jordan Patel monitored trending topics on his tablet, concern evident in his expression. Hashtag Captain Stands Tall is trending nationwide, he reported to airport management. We've got multiple passenger videos circulating, over 3 million views combined in the last 40 minutes. Major news outlets are picking up the story. Indeed, throughout the terminal, passengers and airport staff checked phones to follow the developing situation. Video clips of Captain Reynolds' dignified address spread rapidly, accompanied by first-hand accounts from witnesses. The story had transcended a routine flight cancellation, becoming a cultural flashpoint that resonated far beyond the aviation community. CNN breaking, developing Skylink. Captain cancels entire flight after passenger makes racist comments about black family in first class. Company stock down 4% as video goes viral. Hashtag Captain Stands Tall. Travel Insider. With aviation industry insiders calling Captain Reynolds a stand unprecedented but absolutely necessary. Platinum Elite passenger Elaine Whitfield identified as source of discriminatory comments. Hashtag Skylink racism. Business Week, breaking Skylink. Airlines faces social media firestorm after viral incident. CEO Patricia Montgomery calling emergency board meeting. Stock dropping amid calls for boycott if captain faces discipline. Hashtag boycott Skylink trending. The corporate implications were materializing with remarkable speed. What had begun as one passenger's discriminatory behavior had evolved into a potential corporate crisis that threatened Skylink's reputation and market position. Near the customer service desk, Elaine finally realized the narrative was slipping beyond her control. Her initial live stream had generated supportive comments from like-minded followers. But as the full context spread, the responses shifted dramatically. Wait, you complained about a black family in first class. That's literally the definition of racism. Did you really question the captain's qualifications because of his race? In 25, seriously. I've been Platinum Elite with 3 airlines for a decade, Ikimo, and I'm embarrassed by your behavior. Status doesn't entitle you to be racist. The public repudiation extended beyond social media into the physical gate area. Passengers who might normally have ignored the situation approached customer service representatives to provide witness statements supporting Captain Reynolds' decision. I was in 4F, an elderly woman informed a gate agent. I wanted officially noted that Captain Reynolds acted with absolute professionalism throughout the entire situation. That woman was harassing a family with young children simply because of their race. Similar accounts accumulated rapidly, creating an overwhelming record of support for the captain's decision. The documentation, both official airline records and passenger videos, formed an unusually comprehensive case file for what would normally have been a routine customer service incident. Captain Reynolds emerged from the jetway alongside his crew, having completed all required aircraft procedures before addressing the administrative aftermath. His appearance in the gate area created an immediate reaction. Several passengers applauded spontaneously. Others approached to express support, and phones lifted to capture his dignified progression through the terminal. Captain, CNN is reporting on your decision, Diana informed him quietly as they walked. It's gone national already. Reynolds acknowledged this with a slight nod, but maintained his focus on immediate responsibilities. Let's ensure our passengers are properly accommodated before we address media considerations. His priority, passengers before publicity, further reinforced the principle that had guided his historic decision. As the crew approached the service desk, Skylink's station manager Gregory Phillips intercepted them. Expression tense. Captain Reynolds, corporate headquarters is demanding immediate communication. CEO Montgomery has called personally 3 times. I'll speak with corporate after I've ensured our passengers are properly accommodated, Reynolds replied evenly, particularly the Johnson family. The response, polite but firm, established his continued commitment to passenger dignity above corporate pressure. Phillips appeared ready to insist but reconsidered, perhaps recognizing the public relations implications of appearing to pressure a captain who had just taken a principled stand against discrimination. The Johnson family has been rebooked on Flight 2145, departing at 2:30 p.m., Phillips reported instead. All other passengers are being accommodated as quickly as possible, given the limited availability to Chicago. Thank you. Reynolds' simple acknowledgement carried unmistakable authority despite his precarious professional position. Nearby, the civil rights attorney approached Reynolds discreetly. Captain Robert Martinez, civil rights attorney. I want you to know I've documented the entire incident from pre-boarding through the current aftermath. My card, if you need access to that documentation for any reason. Reynolds accepted the card with a professional nod. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I appreciate your attention to detail. The brief exchange suggested potential legal dimensions that might emerge from the incident, implications that extended far beyond a routine flight cancellation. Across the terminal, news crews had begun arriving, drawn by the viral nature of the story and its powerful symbolic resonance. Airport security established a perimeter around the gate area, attempting to maintain operational functionality amid the growing media presence. Elaine Whitfield, initially eager for attention, now appeared increasingly uncomfortable as the narrative solidified against her. Her phone, previously held high to capture her complaints, was now clutched defensively as she scrolled through the overwhelming social media response. A notification appeared on her screen. Message from TechSphere Solutions HR Department. Urgent. The corporate implications of her public behavior were materializing with remarkable speed. Throughout the gate area, the operational challenges of rebooking 148 passengers continued alongside the human drama of the unfolding situation. Families arranged alternative travel plans. Business travelers made urgent calls to reschedule meetings. Airport staff distributed refreshments to those facing extended delays. And through it all, the social media storm continued building. The hashtags #CaptainStandsTall and #SkylinkRacism climbing trending lists nationwide. What had begun as one passenger's discriminatory behavior had evolved into a national conversation about dignity, authority, and accountability in commercial aviation. Captain Reynolds observed the chaos with outward composure, though the weight of his decision was evident in his eyes. Whatever professional consequences awaited, he had upheld the principle that had guided his entire career. The dignity of every person under his care was non-negotiable, regardless of status, circumstance, or corporate pressure. As he prepared to face those consequences, Reynolds couldn't possibly have anticipated how his decision that morning would ultimately transform not just his own career, but the standards and expectations of an entire industry. Corporate response. He did what? Patricia Montgomery, CEO of Skylink Airlines, stood behind her desk on the 47th floor of corporate headquarters, phone pressed to her ear. At 56, Montgomery had navigated countless operational crises during her 15-year tenure, but the situation unfolding in Atlanta presented unprecedented challenges. Captain Reynolds canceled the entire flight, not just removed the disruptive passenger. James O'Connor, head of public relations, confirmed from the Crisis Management Center 2 floors below. Social media is exploding. #CaptainStandsTall and #SkylinkRacism are both trending nationally. We've got major news networks picking up the story. Montgomery pinched the bridge of her nose, processing the implications. What exactly happened on that aircraft? James, we're piecing together the timeline from crew reports and passenger videos. Platinum Elite member Elaine Whitfield made discriminatory comments toward a black family in first class, questioned Captain Reynolds' qualifications based on race, and refused to comply with crew instructions despite multiple warnings. And instead of simply removing her, Reynolds canceled the entire flight. Montgomery's tone reflected disbelief rather than anger. What was his justification? His formal incident report states, and I quote, "The dignity of all passengers under my care had been compromised to an extent that I could not in good conscience operate the flight as scheduled." End quote. Montgomery sank into her chair, the magnitude of the situation coming into focus. What's the immediate operational impact? 148 passengers requiring rebooking, predominantly to Chicago. Limited options due to approaching weather system. Customer service is managing accommodations and transportation alternatives. And the Platinum Elite passenger Whitfield. O'Connor's hesitation spoke volumes. She's exacerbating the situation, continuing to make discriminatory comments while demanding special accommodations. Multiple passengers are recording her behavior. It's not helpful to our position. Montgomery accessed the real-time social media dashboard on her tablet, scanning the rapidly evolving public response. Video clips of Reynolds' dignified address to the cabin had accumulated millions of views in the past hour. Comments overwhelmingly supported the captain's decision, with many commending Skylink for empowering pilots to take principled stands against discrimination. The narrative was crystallizing faster than corporate could control it. This wasn't merely an operational disruption. It was rapidly becoming a defining moment for the airline's values and public identity. "We need a crisis management team assembled immediately," Montgomery directed. "Legal, operations, HR, public relations, customer experience. Everyone in the executive conference room in 15 minutes. Already gathering," O'Connor confirmed. "One more thing you should know, Captain Reynolds was scheduled for chief pilot evaluation next month." The promotion consideration added another layer of complexity to an already multifaceted situation. Reynolds' career trajectory now hung in the balance alongside the company's public reputation and operational integrity. "Keep me updated on minute-by-minute developments," Montgomery instructed before disconnecting. "And James, no one speaks to media until we have a unified position. Absolutely no one." In the executive conference room, Skylink's leadership team assembled with unprecedented speed. General Counsel Sarah Jenkins reviewed legal considerations while Operations Director Michael Chen assessed the cascading impact on the day's flight schedule. HR Director Thomas Williams examined personnel implications, while Customer Experience Vice President Lisa Rodriguez monitored real-time passenger feedback. Let's establish the facts before discussing response options, Montgomery directed as she entered, bringing immediate focus to the gathering. What exactly do we know happened on Flight 1742? Sarah Jenkins activated the conference room display, showing a timeline constructed from initial reports. At approximately 7:15 a.m., passenger Elaine Whitfield began making discriminatory comments about the Johnson family during pre-boarding, questioning their presence in first class and requesting they be moved. The timeline advanced through escalating incidents: Elaine's continued harassment despite crew warnings, her recording of the family without consent, her questioning of Captain Reynolds' qualifications based on race, and ultimately Reynolds' decision to cancel the flight rather than proceed under compromised conditions. Is Reynolds' decision defensible from a regulatory perspective? Montgomery asked. Turning to legal, absolutely, Atuti. Jenkins confirmed without hesitation. FAA regulations and company policies give captains final authority over all aspects of the flight, including passenger manifest and go/no-go decisions. His documentation is meticulous. Timestamps, direct quotes, multiple witness statements. From a purely legal standpoint, he's on completely solid ground. What about the operational impact? Montgomery directed to Chen. Significant but manageable, ma'am, he reported. The canceled flight creates cascading disruptions through our Chicago hub, affecting approximately 1,200 downstream passengers. We've activated contingency protocols, but we're looking at compensation costs in the $140,000 to $175,000 range for accommodations, meal vouchers, and alternative transportation. Montgomery nodded, processing the financial implications while turning to O'Connor. Public response. The PR director pulled up the real-time analytics dashboard. Unprecedented engagement levels. Video clips from multiple passengers have accumulated over 7 million views combined. Sentiment analysis shows 91% support for Captain Reynolds' decision, 6% neutral, 3% critical. He scrolled through comment samples that reflected the overwhelming public support. Finally, an airline that puts human dignity above schedule performance. Captain Reynolds is exactly the kind of leader commercial aviation needs, standing with him 100%. As a Black business traveler who's experienced similar treatment, I'm switching all my flights to Skylink because of Captain Reynolds. The response suggested an unexpected opportunity amid the operational disruption, a chance to align corporate values with a powerful moment of principled leadership that was clearly resonating with the public. What about our Platinum Elite passenger? Montgomery asked, addressing the customer experience team. Lisa Rodriguez grimaced slightly. Ms. Whitfield has an interesting history with us. Review of her passenger record shows 7 previous incidents requiring documentation, including 3 involving discriminatory comments toward crew members or fellow passengers. She's technically still within our tolerance threshold for Platinum Elite status, but just barely. The revelation added crucial context. This wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that had been managed through conventional customer service protocols until encountering Captain Reynolds' more principled approach. Her current behavior isn't helping her case, O'Connor added. She's continuing to make discriminatory statements while demanding special accommodation. Multiple passengers are documenting her conduct in the terminal, creating a comprehensive record that supports Captain Reynolds' decision. Montgomery absorbed this information, weighing multiple competing considerations: operational impact, legal exposure, public perception, corporate values, and the careers of everyone involved, from Reynolds and his crew to Elaine Whitfield herself. What are our options? She finally asked the assembled team. HR Director Williams outlined the possibilities. From a personnel perspective, we could 1. Support Captain Reynolds' decision completely, 2. Issue a measured reprimand for the operational impact while acknowledging his authority, or 3. Pursue disciplinary action for failure to follow escalation protocols before cancellation. The third option hung in the air. Its corporate logic evident, but its ethical implications troubling. Montgomery studied the social media dashboard, where support for Reynolds continued building by the minute. If we discipline Reynolds, What's the projected public response? She asked O'Connor. The PR director didn't sugarcoat his assessment. Devastating. We're looking at a potential boycott, viral outrage, and significant brand damage. The narrative would immediately become Skylink punishes Captain for standing against racism. And if we support him publicly, Montgomery pressed, we position ourselves as an industry leader in passenger dignity and crew empowerment. Early projections suggest a potential 3–5% market share increase among business travelers who prioritize ethical corporate conduct. The business case was becoming clearer, aligning surprisingly well with the ethical considerations. Montgomery turned to legal for the final critical perspective. Sarah, what's our exposure if Reynolds' decision is challenged by Whitfield? Jenkins considered this carefully. Minimal to none. His documentation is exemplary. Witness statements corroborate every element of his report, and multiple passenger videos provide independent verification. From a purely legal perspective, supporting Reynolds creates virtually no liability, while disciplining him potentially exposes us to wrongful action claims. Montgomery nodded, her decision crystallizing. 27 years in aviation had taught her to recognize pivotal moments when they appeared, instances where corporate values were tested in ways that defined an organization's true character. Here's where we stand, she addressed the team. Captain Reynolds made a difficult decision under challenging circumstances. While the operational impact is significant, his action was fully within his authority and aligned with our stated commitment to dignity for all passengers. The executive team listened intently as Montgomery continued. More importantly, he demonstrated exactly the kind of moral leadership we claim to value. If we discipline him for acting on principle, we reveal our corporate values as empty rhetoric rather than genuine commitments. Her words resonated throughout the room, executives nodding in growing agreement as the path forward became clearer. James, prepare a public statement expressing unequivocal support for Captain Reynolds' decision. Emphasize our zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior and our commitment to dignity for all passengers regardless of status. O'Connor nodded, already drafting language on his tablet. Michael, activate our highest-level customer recovery protocols for all affected passengers except Ms. Whitfield. She receives standard rebooking assistance only. Chen acknowledged the direction with evident approval. Lisa, I want a complete review of our Platinum Elite conduct standards. This incident suggests we've prioritized status over behavior for too long. Draft revisions that explicitly incorporate anti-discrimination expectations into our loyalty program terms. Rodriguez nodded emphatically, having advocated for such changes previously. And Thomas? Montgomery turned to HR. Contact Captain Reynolds directly. Express my personal support for his decision and assure him that his leadership today exemplifies the values we aspire to as an organization. The comprehensive direction energized the executive team, transforming a crisis management session into a defining moment for corporate values. As they dispersed to implement their assignments, Montgomery remained briefly in the conference room, reflecting on the unexpected opportunity that had emerged from operational disruption. Her tablet chimed with a personal notification, a text from her son, Matthew, a college sophomore. Mom, are you seeing what Captain Reynolds did at ATL? That's the kind of airline leadership that would make me proud of what you do. The message struck a deeply personal chord. Beyond market share and operational metrics, beyond public relations and legal considerations, beyond even corporate values themselves, there was the simple human truth that her son had immediately recognized Captain Reynolds had done the right thing. Period. Montgomery smiled slightly as she typed her response. Working on our official statement now. We're standing with him 100%. As she headed back to her office to prepare for the inevitable media inquiries, Montgomery felt unusually certain about a high-stakes decision. Captain Marcus Reynolds had risked his career to defend a fundamental principle. The least Skylink Airlines could do was stand behind him when it mattered most. Public relations storm. CNN breaking news: commercial airline captain cancels entire flight after passenger makes racist comments toward black family. Hashtag Captain stands tall, trending nationwide as video goes viral. The CNN Chiron scrolled beneath aviation correspondent Rebecca Chen as she reported live from Atlanta International Airport. Behind her, Gate B47 remained visibly active with displaced passengers and airline staff managing the aftermath. We're continuing to follow this developing story out of Atlanta, where Skylink Airlines Captain Marcus Reynolds made the unprecedented decision to cancel Flight 1742 to Chicago after a Platinum Elite passenger allegedly made racist comments toward a black family in first class. Chen gestured to the activity behind her. The incident, captured on multiple passenger videos now circulating on social media, shows Captain Reynolds addressing discriminatory behavior with remarkable composure before ultimately deciding to cancel the entire flight rather than proceed under what he termed compromised conditions. The broadcast cut to a clip from one passenger's recording, showing Reynolds standing in full uniform addressing the cabin. "As your captain, I cannot and will not operate this aircraft when the dignity of any passenger has been compromised. You deserve better than that. We all deserve better than that." Returning to Chen, the broadcast continued. The passenger, identified by witnesses as Elaine Whitfield, allegedly made multiple discriminatory comments about a black family seated in first class and questioned Captain Reynolds' qualifications based on race. Skylink Airlines has not yet issued an official statement, but sources indicate an emergency meeting of executive leadership is currently underway. Similar coverage spread rapidly across news platforms, the story's powerful symbolism resonating far beyond routine aviation incidents. The combination of clear racial discrimination, principled leadership, and comprehensive documentation had created a perfect storm of public interest. In Atlanta's terminal, the media presence expanded rapidly. Local affiliates conducted interviews with willing passengers. National networks dispatched additional correspondence. Aviation blogs and travel channels provided minute-by-minute updates as the situation continued developing. Skylink's corporate communications team worked frantically to manage the unfolding narrative, knowing their response would define the company's values in the public consciousness for years to come. "We need that statement from leadership immediately." Senior communications manager Daniel Wright urged colleagues via conference call. "Every minute without an official position allows others to control the narrative." The pressure intensified as Skylink's stock price responded to the viral incident. Trading screens throughout the financial district showed a concerning pattern. Skylink Airlines skied by 2%, trading volume 328% of daily average. The market reaction reflected investor concern about potential boycotts, operational disruption, and litigation, all reasonable fears without a clear corporate response to anchor expectations. On social media, #BoycottSkylink began trending alongside #CaptainStandsTall, creating competing narratives about the company's values and leadership. Without official guidance, employees, passengers, and aviation communities engaged in speculation about potential consequences for Reynolds and his crew. Aviation professional. "If Skylink Air disciplines Captain Reynolds for standing against racism, they'll lose my business permanently. Watching closely." #CaptainStandsTall, travel influencer. Dear Skylink Air, your response to Captain Reynolds' decision will define your brand for a generation. Choose wisely. #StandWithReynolds. Business travel. Breaking multiple corporate travel departments, reportedly placing Skylink Air contracts on hold, pending response to #CaptainStandsTall incident, potentially millions in revenue at risk. The pressure extended beyond social media into Skylink's operational environment. Pilots from other airlines expressed solidarity through professional channels. Flight attendant unions issued statements supporting crew empowerment against discriminatory behavior. Industry associations monitored the situation for potential policy implications. At TechSphere Solutions, Elaine Whitfield's employer, a parallel crisis unfolded as video of her behavior spread through professional networks. The company's diversity commitments, prominently featured in their corporate marketing, stood in stark contrast to their executives' documented conduct. "This is Amanda Collins, TechSphere Solutions. I'm calling regarding an urgent matter involving your employee, Elaine Whitfield." The HR director spoke rapidly into her phone. "We've become aware of an incident on Skylink Airlines that appears to involve Ms. Whitfield making discriminatory statements. Given our company's zero-tolerance policy for such behavior, we're initiating an immediate review." The corporate consequences extended far beyond the immediate airline incident, creating ripple effects through multiple organizations connected to the key participants. Back at Atlanta International Airport, Captain Reynolds and his crew had been escorted to a private operations room to manage administrative requirements and avoid the growing media presence. Reynolds completed his formal incident report with meticulous attention to detail, documenting every relevant aspect of the situation that had led to his historic decision. First Officer Diana Morales sat nearby, providing supporting documentation from her perspective. "The Pilots Association has issued a statement supporting your decision," she informed Reynolds quietly. "They're calling it exemplary command judgment in defense of passenger dignity." Reynolds nodded appreciatively but maintained his focus on proper documentation. Throughout his career, he had learned that thorough, factual records provided the strongest foundation for principled decisions, especially when those decisions might be scrutinized by corporate leadership. Kevin and Maria, the cabin crew who had managed the escalating situation professionally despite extraordinary pressure, completed their supporting reports with similar attention to detail. The comprehensive documentation created an unusually complete record of the incident from multiple perspectives, establishing a clear factual foundation for Reynolds' decision. In the terminal, the Johnson family waited quietly in the airline's premium lounge, protected from media attention by attentive staff. Mr. Johnson helped the twins with a board game while Mrs. Johnson spoke softly with customer service representatives about their rebooked travel arrangements. "We appreciate your patience during this difficult situation," the lounge manager assured them. "Captain Reynolds asked personally that your family receive priority assistance. We appreciate his actions today," Mrs. Johnson replied simply. Not everyone would have had the courage to take such a stand. The understatement captured the profound significance of Reynolds' decision. In a system that traditionally prioritized operational metrics, schedule performance, and premium customer satisfaction above all else, he had placed human dignity at the center of his command authority, regardless of personal or professional consequences. Near the Crisis Management Center, Skylink's communications team finally received the official statement approved by CEO Montgomery and the executive leadership team. The carefully crafted language would define the company's position at a pivotal moment. Skylink Airlines stands unequivocally with Captain Marcus Reynolds and his crew in their defense of dignity for all passengers. The decision to cancel Flight 1742 following discriminatory behavior by a passenger was fully within Captain Reynolds' authority and exemplifies our commitment to a respectful travel environment for everyone. Skylink has zero tolerance for discrimination in any form. We regret the inconvenience to affected passengers but affirm that dignity must never be compromised for operational convenience. Captain Reynolds' leadership today reflects the highest values of our organization, and we are proud of his principled stand. We are providing all necessary assistance to affected passengers and will use this incident to strengthen our commitment to respectful travel for all. Further details will be provided as appropriate. The statement, clear, unambiguous, and values-centered, represented a significant departure from the cautious corporate language typically deployed during operational disruptions. Its release would commit Skylink to a definitive position at a moment when corporate values were being tested in the public arena. As Communications Director James O'Connor prepared to distribute the statement across all channels, he recognized the historic nature of the moment. "This isn't just about managing a PR situation," he told his team. "This is about defining who we are as a company when it matters most." Throughout the terminal, on social media, and across news platforms, people waited for Skylink's official response, knowing it would reveal whether Captain Reynolds' principled stand would be vindicated or undermined by the corporate structure he served. The statement was released simultaneously across all platforms at precisely 11:45 a.m., creating an immediate and powerful impact on the developing narrative. Within minutes, #SkylinkStands began trending alongside the existing hashtags. Public response overwhelmingly positive to the company's unequivocal support for Reynolds' decision. Aviation analysts noted the unusual clarity of the corporate position. Industry observers commented on the alignment between stated values and actual decision-making. Business ethicists highlighted the case as a potential inflection point in how airlines balance operational considerations against human dignity. For Captain Marcus Reynolds, isolated from the public storm in the operations room, the corporate statement represented something much simpler but far more meaningful. Validation that doing the right thing would be recognized and supported, even when it came at significant operational cost. As he completed the final details of his incident report, Reynolds remained unaware that his decision that morning had already begun transforming not just his own career, but the standards and expectations of an entire industry. The Turning Point CEO, Patricia Montgomery, stood at the window of her 47th floor office, gazing across the Atlanta skyline as she processed the complete video evidence from Flight 1742. On her tablet, Multiple passenger recordings had been compiled into a comprehensive timeline, providing unprecedented documentation of the entire incident from pre-boarding through Captain Reynolds' historic decision. "Play it again," she instructed her assistant, "the section where she questions his qualifications." The video resumed, capturing Elaine Whitfield's voice with perfect clarity. "I think we deserve a different pilot who actually knows what they're doing, not someone who probably got fast-tracked through training to meet some quota." Montgomery's expression tightened at the explicitly racist implication. As a female CEO who had faced her share of discriminatory assumptions throughout her career, she recognized the pattern immediately. Competence questioned based solely on identity rather than qualifications or performance. "That's enough," she said quietly, setting down the tablet. "I've seen everything I need to see." Her decision had solidified before the official statement was released, but the complete evidence reinforced her confidence in supporting Reynolds unequivocally. This wasn't merely about managing public relations or protecting the company's reputation. It was about fundamental values that transcended operational considerations. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Montgomery, I have Marcus Williams Jr. on line 1. Montgomery straightened immediately, recognizing the name of her own son. At 19, Marcus Jr. was a sophomore at Howard University, studying business with hopes of eventually joining the aviation industry his mother had helped shape. "Put him through," she directed, lifting the receiver. "Marcus, is everything all right?" "Mom, I just saw what happened on that Skylink flight in Atlanta." Her son's voice carried unusual emotion. "The captain who canceled the whole flight because of that racist passenger. Please tell me you're supporting him." The personal dimension caught Montgomery momentarily off guard. Her son rarely commented on corporate decisions, maintaining a healthy separation between family and business. This direct inquiry revealed how deeply the incident had resonated. "We've just released a statement fully supporting Captain Reynolds," she assured him. "His decision aligned perfectly with our values, even if it created operational challenges." "Thank you," Marcus Jr. replied, evident relief in his voice. "You know this matters to me personally, right? As someone who's experienced exactly what that family went through." The comment struck Montgomery with unexpected force. Her son was referencing an incident from 2 years earlier, a first-class flight where another passenger had questioned his presence, suggesting he must have been upgraded by mistake, despite his paid ticket. Montgomery had been furious when he told her, but operational realities had limited her ability to address such incidents systematically. "I know it does, Marcus, and it matters to me too, not just as CEO, but as your mother." The conversation continued briefly before Montgomery returned to the immediate situation. Her son's perspective had added personal urgency to a decision that was already professionally clear. Captain Reynolds hadn't just protected Skylink's abstract values, he had protected real families like her own from the humiliation her son had experienced. As she prepared for the emergency board meeting, Montgomery reviewed the complete situation assessment compiled by her executive team. Operational impact: 148 passengers rebooked. Estimated $165,000 in accommodation and compensation costs. Potential downstream disruptions affecting approximately 1,200 additional passengers. Legal assessment: captain's decision fully supported by FAA regulations and company policies. Comprehensive documentation established clear justification, minimal liability exposure. Public response: overwhelmingly positive reaction to Captain Reynolds' decision, 91% supportive. Corporate statements supporting Reynolds generating positive engagement across platforms. #Skylink stands trending nationally. Market impact: initial 4.2% stock decline, stabilizing following official statement. Analyst projections suggesting potential long-term benefit from ethical leadership positioning. Personnel considerations: Captain Reynolds scheduled for chief pilot evaluation next month. Exemplary service record with no previous incidents requiring corporate review. The comprehensive assessment confirmed Montgomery's instinct. Supporting Reynolds wasn't just ethically correct, it was also sound business strategy. The alignment of values and operational interests created a rare opportunity to demonstrate authentic leadership rather than mere damage control. Her phone buzzed with a text from James O'Connor in public relations. Elaine Whitfield's employer, TechSphere Solutions, just issued statement placing her on administrative leave pending investigation. They're distancing themselves completely. The corporate consequences were expanding beyond Skylink, affecting all organizations connected to the key participants. TechSphere Solutions, with its prominent diversity commitments, clearly recognized the reputational damage of being associated with Whitfield's documented behavior. Montgomery's assistant appeared at the door. The board is assembled in the conference room. Ms. Montgomery, and Captain Reynolds is available by secure video conference whenever you're ready to speak with him directly. Thank you. I'll address the board first, then speak with Reynolds privately. As she gathered her materials for the board presentation, Montgomery reflected on the extraordinary circumstances that had transformed a routine Friday morning flight into a defining moment for corporate values. Captain Marcus Reynolds had made a difficult decision under intense pressure, prioritizing human dignity above operational convenience, financial considerations, and career advancement. Now it was her turn to demonstrate similar courage at the executive level, ensuring that principled leadership was recognized and supported throughout the organization. In the executive conference room, board members reviewed the situation briefing with expressions ranging from concern to admiration. The operational disruption worried some, while others immediately recognized the ethical imperative that had driven Reynolds' decision. Montgomery entered with characteristic confidence, taking her position at the head of the table. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for assembling on short notice. We're facing an unprecedented situation that requires clear direction from leadership. She activated the room's display system, showing compiled video evidence alongside operational impact assessments. Captain Marcus Reynolds made the decision to cancel Flight 1742 following documented discriminatory behavior by a Platinum Elite passenger. I've reviewed all available evidence and spoken with our executive team. Montgomery paused, making eye contact with each board member to emphasize her next statement. I want to be absolutely clear. I support Captain Reynolds' decision completely and have issued a public statement to that effect. This isn't just about managing a PR situation. It's about living our values when they're tested in the real world. Several board members nodded in approval, while others maintained neutral expressions, waiting for the complete assessment. From an operational perspective, Montgomery continued, the cancellation creates significant but manageable disruption. From a legal perspective, Reynolds acted completely within his authority. From a public relations perspective, his decision has generated overwhelming support across all platforms. She advanced to the final slide, which displayed Skylink's core value statement alongside Captain Reynolds' actual words from the aircraft. I cannot and will not operate this aircraft when the dignity of any passenger has been compromised. The alignment is perfect, Montgomery noted. Reynolds didn't just follow policy, he embodied the values we claim to uphold. If we fail to support him now, we reveal those values as empty rhetoric rather than genuine commitments. The presentation concluded with Montgomery's formal recommendation, full support for Captain Reynolds' decision, acceleration of his chief pilot evaluation, and implementation of enhanced anti-discrimination protocols throughout the organization. Board discussion followed, with the majority quickly aligning behind Montgomery's position. The operational disruption created legitimate concerns, but the ethical imperative and public response made the path forward increasingly clear. Board Chair Richard Hamilton summarized the emerging consensus. While we acknowledge the significant operational impact, Captain Reynolds appears to have acted in accordance with both regulatory requirements and our stated values. The board supports the CEO's decision to stand behind his actions publicly. With board alignment secured, Montgomery proceeded to her next critical task, speaking directly with Reynolds himself. The secure video connection activated in her office, revealing the captain still in his uniform at Atlanta International Airport. His expression composed but understandably tense. Captain Reynolds, Montgomery began. I'm Patricia Montgomery, CEO of Skylink Airlines. Thank you for making yourself available during what must be an extraordinarily challenging day. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me directly. Ms. Montgomery, Reynolds replied professionally. I understand the operational implications of my decision and am prepared to address any questions or concerns. The response, focused on accountability rather than self-justification, reinforced Montgomery's confidence in Reynolds' character. This was a leader who understood that difficult decisions required full ownership, regardless of circumstances. Captain, I've reviewed all available evidence regarding Flight 1742, including crew reports, passenger statements, and video documentation. I want to be absolutely clear you have my complete support and that of the entire executive team. Reynolds' carefully maintained professional demeanor showed momentary surprise before returning to composed attention. Your decision to cancel the flight rather than proceed under compromised conditions demonstrated exactly the kind of principled leadership we aspire to throughout our organization. You placed human dignity above operational convenience, which is exactly what our values demand. Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery, Reynolds replied, evident relief in his voice despite his continued professional composure. I made the decision I believe was necessary under the circumstances, but I fully understand the operational impact it created. Sometimes operational disruption is the price of ethical leadership. Captain, it's a price worth paying. The simple acknowledgement seemed to lift a weight from Reynolds' shoulders. Throughout his career, he had operated within a system that often prioritized on-time performance and customer satisfaction metrics above all else. To hear the CEO explicitly validate a different priority hierarchy represented a potentially transformative moment. What happens next? Reynolds asked practically, still focused on the immediate situation despite the validation. We've issued a public statement supporting your decision unequivocally. Your scheduled chief pilot evaluation will proceed as planned next month, with today's leadership incorporated as a positive factor in the assessment. Most importantly, we'll be using this incident to strengthen our anti-discrimination protocols throughout the organization. Montgomery leaned slightly closer to the camera. Captain Reynolds, you've created a defining moment for our airline, one that will be remembered long after the operational disruption has been forgotten. Thank you for having the courage to stand for dignity when it mattered most. The conversation concluded with practical details about documentation requirements and immediate next steps. Throughout the exchange, Reynolds maintained his professional demeanor, though the relief of corporate support was evident in his more relaxed posture. As the video connection ended, Montgomery reflected on the extraordinary circumstances that had transformed a routine flight cancellation into a watershed moment for airline leadership. Captain Marcus Reynolds had risked his career to defend a fundamental principle, in supporting him publicly. Skylink Airlines had aligned its corporate values with authentic action in a way that would resonate far beyond this single incident. The turning point had arrived, not just for Reynolds and his crew, not just for Skylink Airlines, but potentially for standards and expectations throughout commercial aviation. What began as one passenger's discriminatory behavior had catalyzed a moment of moral clarity that would ultimately transform an entire industry's approach to dignity, authority, and accountability. Part 4, Systemic Impact, 1 week later. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Marcus Reynolds. On behalf of our entire crew, welcome aboard Skylink Flight 1742 with service to Chicago O'Hare. The standard announcement carried special significance for the flight crew and the handful of passengers who recognized Reynolds' name from the viral incident 1 week earlier. As he completed pre-flight checks in the cockpit, Reynolds maintained his characteristic professionalism despite the extraordinary attention his decision had generated. First Officer Diana Morales, promoted to the route permanently following their shared stand against discrimination, monitored systems while maintaining communication with ground control. Quite a difference from last Friday, she commented during a private moment between announcements. Reynolds nodded slightly. Same flight number, same route, completely different circumstances. The understated exchange masked the profound transformation that had occurred within Skylink Airlines during the 7 days following Reynolds' historic decision. What began as an operational disruption had evolved into a defining moment for the company's values and industry leadership. In the main cabin, Kevin Baker welcomed passengers with particular attention to a family with young children, ensuring they were comfortably settled before continuing through the aisle. His Skylink uniform now featured a small silver pin, a pair of wings embracing the word dignity, that had been issued to all crew members as part of the newly implemented Reynolds Protocol. The protocol, developed with unprecedented speed and named in honor of the captain's principled stand, established clear procedures for addressing discriminatory behavior aboard Skylink aircraft. The comprehensive guidelines provided specific intervention protocols, documentation requirements, and passenger education resources designed to prevent incidents before they occurred. The Reynolds Protocol represents a fundamental shift in how we approach passenger conduct. CEO Patricia Montgomery had announced at the press conference 3 days earlier, Rather than treating discriminatory behavior as a routine customer service issue, we now recognize it as a fundamental threat to the safety, dignity, and well-being of everyone aboard our aircraft. The protocol's implementation had been accompanied by comprehensive training for all customer-facing staff, from gate agents to flight attendants. The message was unambiguous. Skylink would no longer tolerate discrimination in any form, regardless of the passenger's status or spending history. In executive offices throughout Atlanta, the operational aftermath of Flight 1742's cancellation had been meticulously analyzed. The initial $165,000 in accommodation and rebooking costs had been offset by unexpected positive outcomes: a 7% increase in new bookings following the viral incident, accelerated loyalty program enrollment, and significant positive engagement across all digital platforms. More substantively, Skylink had launched an internal review of past discrimination incidents, examining how they had been handled and identifying opportunities for improved response. The review had revealed a troubling pattern. Complaints involving Platinum Elite members were 43% less likely to result in corrective action compared to incidents involving standard passengers. We've had a systemic bias in how we handle these situations. Customer Experience Vice President Lisa Rodriguez acknowledged during the executive briefing. Status has effectively purchased tolerance for behavior we wouldn't accept from regular passengers. The recognition triggered immediate policy revisions, including updated loyalty program terms that explicitly established anti-discrimination expectations for all passengers regardless of status. The revised agreement had been distributed to all members with a personal note from Montgomery explaining the changes. At Skylink Airlines, we believe dignity is non-negotiable. While we value our frequent travelers and appreciate your loyalty, we cannot and will not tolerate discriminatory behavior that compromises the well-being of fellow passengers or crew members. The privilege of status carries a responsibility to exemplify the respect all travelers deserve. The message had generated overwhelming positive response, with 94% of Platinum Elite members expressing support for the clarified standards. The alignment between corporate values and customer expectations created a rare opportunity to strengthen loyalty while enhancing ethical practices. For Elaine Whitfield, the consequences had been swift and significant, permanently banned from Skylink Airlines. She had subsequently been placed on a no-fly list shared by 3 partner carriers following review of her customer history. The industry-wide response reflected a growing recognition that discriminatory behavior represented a legitimate safety concern beyond mere customer service considerations. Her professional situation had deteriorated equally rapidly. TechSphere Solutions, after reviewing comprehensive evidence of her conduct, had terminated her employment for violations of the company's ethics code and diversity commitments. The decision, initially implemented as administrative leave, had been finalized after Elaine's continued social media posts demonstrated an unwillingness to acknowledge the discriminatory nature of her behavior. TechSphere Solutions is committed to fostering an environment of respect and inclusion. The company's statement read, "The documented conduct of Mrs. Whitfield fundamentally contradicts our core values and cannot be reconciled with her leadership responsibilities within our organization." The corporate consequences extended beyond individual accountability, triggering discussions throughout business communities about the relationship between personal conduct and professional representation. Executive coaches reported increased requests for discrimination awareness, training from corporate leaders concerned about similar reputational risks. For the Johnson family, the aftermath had brought unexpected opportunities for positive impact. Following a personal apology from CEO Montgomery, they had accepted an invitation to consult on Skylink's passenger dignity initiatives, providing perspective that informed the Reynolds protocol from a passenger viewpoint. "We never sought attention or recognition," Mr. Johnson explained during their meeting with the development team, "but if our experience can help prevent similar situations for other families, we're willing to contribute to that effort." Mrs. Johnson's insights proved particularly valuable in crafting passenger education materials that would be displayed during boarding and included in loyalty program communications. Her gentle but firm perspective helped shape language that educated without alienating, clarified expectations without creating unnecessary confrontation. The twins, initially confused by the attention their family had received, found meaning in the positive changes that emerged from their difficult experience. Sometimes bad things happen so better things can grow. 10-year-old Amara observed with wisdom beyond her years. Like when forest fires make room for new trees. Back aboard Flight 1742, Reynolds completed final preparations for departure. The routine procedures, systems checks, clearance confirmation, crew readiness certification, contained deeper significance for a captain who had risked his career to uphold the dignity of passengers under his care. Skylink 1742, you're cleared for pushback. Ground control confirmed through his headset. And Captain Reynolds, several ground crew members asked me to pass along their thanks for what you did last week. You've got a lot of supporters out here. Reynolds acknowledged the message professionally, though the personal impact was evident in his eyes. Throughout his 22-year career, he had encountered both subtle and overt discrimination, facing assumptions about his qualifications that white colleagues never experienced. To receive explicit recognition for taking a principled stand represented a profound shift in aviation culture. As the aircraft backed away from the gate, First Officer Morales monitored systems while reflecting on the broader implications of their shared experience. The aviation community is watching what happens next, she noted during a private moment. This isn't just about one flight or one airline anymore. Reynolds nodded, understanding completely. Their decision had transcended routine operations, becoming a reference point for discussions about authority, accountability, and dignity throughout commercial aviation. The immediate operational disruption had evolved into something far more significant, a potential transformation in how the industry balanced technical performance with human dignity. As Flight 1742 taxied toward the runway, passengers settled into their seats, most unaware of the historic resonance of their routine journey. For them, this was simply a Friday morning flight to Chicago. For the aviation industry, it represented the beginning of a new approach to passenger dignity that would ultimately transform standards and expectations throughout commercial travel. Reynolds performed his final checks with characteristic precision, his command authority now carrying additional dimensions of meaning and recognition. The same skilled hands that had once risked career advancement for principal now guided the aircraft smoothly into position for takeoff, embodying the balance of technical excellence and moral courage that defined truly exceptional aviation leadership. Skylink 1742 cleared for takeoff, the tower confirmed. Reynolds advanced the throttles, beginning the journey not just to Chicago, but into a transformed understanding of what commercial aviation could and should represent in its finest form. Industry transformation. The conference room at the Federal Aviation Administration's Washington headquarters buzzed with unprecedented energy as industry leaders gathered for the inaugural Passenger Dignity Summit. Representatives from major airlines, pilot associations, flight attendant unions, and passenger advocacy groups filled the room, drawn together by the ripple effects of what industry publications had dubbed the Reynolds moment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this historic gathering. FAA Administrator James Wilson addressed the assembled leaders. 8 weeks ago, a single captain's decision catalyzed a conversation that was long overdue in commercial aviation. Today, we begin the work of transforming that moment into lasting industry change. At the front of the room, Captain Marcus Reynolds sat alongside Skylink CEO Patricia Montgomery, their presence symbolizing the alignment between operational leadership and executive support that had made their approach so effective. Reynolds maintained his characteristic professional composure, though the significance of the gathering was evident in his attentive posture. The Reynolds protocol has demonstrated remarkable effectiveness in its initial implementation. Wilson continued, displaying statistical evidence on the presentation screen. Skylink Airlines reports a 67% decrease in discriminatory incidents since implementation. More significantly, crew intervention now occurs earlier, preventing escalation in 89% of potential situations. The numbers told a compelling story of cultural transformation beyond mere policy compliance. By empowering crews to address discriminatory behavior proactively, Skylink had fundamentally altered the environment aboard their aircraft, creating measurable improvements in passenger experience and operational stability. We're not here to mandate specific programs, Wilson clarified. Each carrier must develop approaches that align with their operational realities. However, the principles established in the Reynolds Protocol provide a framework worth considering. Clear standards, consistent enforcement, comprehensive documentation, and unequivocal leadership support. Throughout the room, aviation executives and operational leaders engaged with the presentation from diverse perspectives. Safety officers recognized the connection between discriminatory behavior and potential disruption at altitude. Customer experience teams calculated the financial impact of preventing negative incidents. Legal departments considered liability implications for intervention versus non-intervention. The comprehensive business case for addressing discrimination systematically had emerged clearly over the preceding weeks. Skylink's market position had strengthened significantly following their principled stance, with bookings increasing 12% compared to the same period the previous year. Their stock price, after an initial decline during the incident, had rebounded to reach record levels as investors recognized the alignment between ethical leadership and sustainable business practices. More importantly, employee satisfaction metrics had shown dramatic improvement, with crew members reporting increased pride in their organization and stronger commitment to its success. The connection between dignified passenger treatment and employee engagement created a compelling virtuous cycle that enhanced both operational performance and customer experience. I'd like to invite Captain Reynolds to share his perspective on the operational implications of the protocol that bears his name, Wilson announced, yielding the podium. Reynolds approached with characteristic modesty, his uniform impeccable as always. Thank you, Administrator Wilson. I want to emphasize that the protocol emerged from collaborative efforts throughout Skylink Airlines, not from my individual decision. The gracious deflection of personal credit reinforced why Reynolds had emerged as such an effective symbol of principled leadership. Throughout the media attention and industry recognition, he had maintained focus on the underlying issues rather than personal advancement. From an operational perspective, clear standards and consistent enforcement actually simplify our work as flight crews, Reynolds explained. When passengers understand expectations from the beginning and recognize that status doesn't exempt anyone from basic respect, we experience fewer disruptive incidents and can focus more completely on our primary responsibility: safe, efficient transportation. He displayed data from Skylink's implementation experience, showing how documented incidents had initially increased during the education phase before declining significantly as the new standards became widely understood. The pattern suggested that addressing problems directly created short-term disruption but long-term improvement, a lesson with implications far beyond discrimination issues. Most importantly, Reynolds concluded, we've discovered that promoting dignity doesn't compromise operational performance. It enhances it. When crew members feel empowered to address problematic behavior before it escalates, we prevent the major disruptions that truly impact on-time performance and passenger satisfaction. The business case complemented the moral imperative perfectly, creating a comprehensive rationale for industry-wide transformation. As Reynolds returned to his seat, representatives from other major carriers engaged in thoughtful discussion about implementation approaches that would work within their specific operational contexts. United Airlines is implementing enhanced training for all customer-facing staff, their representatives shared. We've incorporated key elements of the Reynolds protocol while adapting the specifics to our operational procedures. American Airlines has revised our Platinum and Executive Platinum member agreements, another added. We've explicitly established anti-discrimination expectations with consequences for violations, regardless of status level. Delta has launched a passenger dignity campaign across all digital platforms. A third contributed, we're setting clear expectations before customers ever reach the airport, reducing potential conflicts through proactive education. The collaborative approach represented a remarkable shift in industry dynamics. Rather than treating discrimination as an isolated customer service issue managed individually, carriers were increasingly recognizing it as a systemic challenge requiring coordinated response. Throughout the summit, pilot representatives shared operational perspectives, while flight attendant unions contributed frontline insights. Passenger advocacy groups provided valuable feedback about the traveler experience, ensuring that policies balanced enforcement with education effectively. In a panel discussion following Reynolds' presentation, First Officer Diana Morales shared her perspective as part of the crew that had experienced the watershed incident. What made Captain Reynolds' leadership so effective was his clarity, she explained. There was no ambiguity about standards or consequences, which made our roles as crew members much more straightforward. The observation highlighted a critical implementation factor. Clear communication reduced the burden on individual crew members to make complex judgment calls during already challenging situations. By establishing explicit standards with unequivocal leadership support, airlines could simultaneously empower their teams and simplify their decision-making. As the summit continued, FAA Administrator Wilson introduced the next phase of industry response, based on the clear operational benefits demonstrated through early adoption of dignity-centered protocols. We're accelerating our passenger conduct guidelines update to incorporate these learnings. The regulatory development, while not mandating specific programs, would establish consistent expectations across carriers, creating a unified framework while allowing operational flexibility. The approach represented a balanced use of regulatory authority that supported industry-led innovation, rather than imposing one-size-fits-all solutions. We anticipate releasing these updated guidelines within 60 days. Wilson explained, they'll incorporate best practices emerging from early implementers like Skylink, while providing flexibility for each carrier's specific operational context. For Skylink CEO Patricia Montgomery, the industry-wide response validated her decision to support Reynolds unequivocally. What began as a challenging operational disruption had transformed into a leadership opportunity that positioned her company at the forefront of industry evolution. The business case has become increasingly clear. Montgomery shared during her presentation segment, dignity-centered operations don't just reflect our values, they enhance our performance across every meaningful metric. From crew retention to customer loyalty, from operational efficiency to market position, addressing discrimination systematically creates measurable improvements. The comprehensive data supporting her assertion shifted the conversation from moral imperative alone to a holistic business case that aligned ethical leadership with operational excellence. The emerging consensus recognized discrimination not merely as a customer service challenge, but as a fundamental business risk requiring systematic management. As the summit concluded, Administrator Wilson summarized the extraordinary progress represented by the gathering. 8 weeks ago, a single decision aboard a single aircraft created a watershed moment for our industry. Today, that moment has evolved into a movement that will ultimately transform commercial aviation for the better. The transformation extended far beyond policies and procedures into the cultural foundations of air travel itself. By establishing dignity as a non-negotiable element of the passenger experience, the industry was recalibrating expectations for travelers and crew members alike, creating a more sustainable environment for the complex human interactions that define commercial aviation. For Captain Marcus Reynolds, watching from his seat as the industry leaders discussed implementation approaches, the outcome far exceeded anything he could have anticipated when making his principled decision 8 weeks earlier. What began as a stand for one family's dignity had catalyzed changes that would ultimately benefit millions of travelers across the global aviation system. Legal and professional consequences. The conference room at Lawson & Schmidt Legal Partners projected an atmosphere of understated elegance, with mahogany panels and subtle lighting that conveyed both tradition and authority. At the polished table, civil rights attorney Robert Martinez reviewed documentation with the Johnson family, organizing materials for what had evolved into a landmark case with industry-wide implications. The evidence is exceptionally comprehensive, Martinez explained, indicating multiple tablets displaying synchronized video from different passenger perspectives. We have the initial discriminatory statements, crew intervention attempts, Captain Reynolds' address to the cabin, and Ms. Whitfield's continued behavior following deplaning. Mr. Johnson nodded, though his expression revealed lingering discomfort with the legal proceedings. We never wanted this to become a lawsuit. We simply wanted to travel with our daughters without being harassed. I understand completely, Martinez assured him, but Ms. Whitfield's behavior wasn't just personally hurtful. It revealed systemic issues that affect countless travelers. Your willingness to participate helps ensure lasting change. The Johnsons had initially hesitated to pursue legal action, preferring to focus on their daughter's well-being rather than prolonged conflict. However, Elaine Whitfield's subsequent media campaign, claiming discrimination against Platinum Elite members and denying any racial motivation in her behavior, had ultimately persuaded them to support Martinez's case. We're not seeking punitive damages, Martinez clarified, understanding the family's priorities. The settlement proposal focuses on systemic remedies, industry-wide training programs, passenger education initiatives, and scholarship support for underrepresented groups in aviation leadership. The approach aligned perfectly with the Johnsons' values, emphasizing positive transformation rather than retribution. Their primary motivation had always been ensuring other families wouldn't experience similar discrimination, particularly children exposed to the uniquely public humiliation of prejudice during air travel. Across town at Skylink's corporate headquarters, the professional consequences continued unfolding with equal significance. Captain Marcus Reynolds entered the executive conference room for his rescheduled chief pilot evaluation. His uniform immaculate as always, despite the extraordinary attention his decision had generated. Captain Reynolds, Chief Operations Officer Michael Chen greeted him with evident respect. "Thank you for joining us today." Reynolds nodded professionally, maintaining his characteristic composure despite the high-stakes nature of the evaluation. The committee assembled before him represented senior leadership from operations, safety, and human resources, the traditional evaluation team for chief pilot candidates. "Before we begin the formal assessment," Chen continued, "I want to acknowledge the unique circumstances surrounding your candidacy. Your decision aboard Flight 11542 has generated unprecedented attention, both within our organization and throughout the industry." Reynolds remained attentive but offered no comment, allowing the committee to establish their perspective without influence. Having reviewed all available evidence and operational impacts, this committee unanimously agrees that your leadership during that incident exemplified exactly the qualities we seek in our chief pilot position. You demonstrated principled decision-making under pressure, clear communication during crisis, and unwavering commitment to passenger dignity regardless of status. The validation terrain, delivered in the formal context of professional evaluation rather than public relations, carried particular weight for Reynolds. Throughout his career, he had focused on operational excellence and professional integrity, believing that performance would ultimately speak for itself despite the additional scrutiny he often faced as a black pilot. However, Chen continued, "We would be remiss not to conduct a comprehensive evaluation based on your complete service record rather than this single incident, however significant." Reynolds nodded in agreement, appreciating the committee's commitment to thorough assessment rather than symbolic promotion. "I wouldn't want it any other way, sir." The evaluation proceeded with methodical attention to Reynolds' complete professional history: 22 years of commercial service with over 16,000 flight hours, impeccable safety record, consistent operational excellence, and demonstrated leadership during multiple challenging situations. After 90 minutes of detailed discussion covering technical proficiency, crew resource management, operational decision-making, and leadership philosophy, Chen called for the committee's final assessment. Based on comprehensive evaluation of Captain Reynolds' complete service record, this committee unanimously recommends his immediate promotion to Chief Pilot, Operations Division, effective next pay period. The recommendation, based on merit rather than publicity, represented the professional validation Reynolds had worked toward throughout his career. His historic stand aboard Flight 11542 had been incorporated as evidence of his leadership qualities, but the promotion ultimately reflected his comprehensive excellence rather than a single decision. "Congratulations, Chief Pilot Reynolds." Chen extended his hand formally. "Your leadership will help shape the next generation of Skylink pilots." "Thank you, sir," Reynolds replied with characteristic modesty. "I appreciate the committee's thorough assessment and look forward to serving in this capacity." The professional milestone represented significant progress not just for Reynolds personally, but for representation within aviation leadership broadly. As chief pilot, he would influence training protocols, operational standards, and crew development across the entire organization, amplifying the impact of his principles throughout the system. At the federal level, additional consequences continued unfolding as regulatory authorities incorporated lessons from the incident into broader aviation oversight. FAA representatives met with industry leaders to accelerate passenger conduct guideline updates, establishing clearer standards for addressing discriminatory behavior aboard commercial aircraft. The Reynolds incident demonstrated that discriminatory behavior isn't merely a customer service issue, it's a legitimate safety concern with operational implications. FAA Administrator Wilson explained during the regulatory review session, "When crew members are distracted by managing passenger conflicts, their attention is diverted from primary safety responsibilities." The recategorization represented a fundamental shift in regulatory perspective, moving discrimination from a peripheral consideration to a central safety concern worthy of systematic attention. The approach provided stronger regulatory foundation for airlines implementing dignity-centered protocols, reinforcing operational decisions with federal support. For Elaine Whitfield, The legal and professional consequences continued mounting as her case progressed through multiple systems, beyond her termination from TechSphere Solutions and permanent banning from multiple airlines. She now faced formal charges under federal aviation regulations regarding interference with crew members and discriminatory conduct aboard commercial aircraft. Ms. Whitfield, the evidence against you is comprehensive and compelling, her attorney advised during a private consultation. Multiple video recordings, witness statements, and crew documentation establish a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior despite repeated warnings. I strongly recommend considering the settlement offer. The proposal offered Whitfield an opportunity to avoid federal charges by acknowledging her behavior, completing extensive anti-discrimination training, and contributing to industry education initiatives. The approach reflected regulatory focus on systematic improvement rather than punitive measures alone. Though the personal and professional consequences remain significant regardless of her decision, throughout the Skylink system and across the industry, flight attendant training programs incorporated enhanced protocols for identifying, documenting, and addressing discriminatory behavior. Crew resource management curricula expanded to include scenarios based on the Reynolds incident, providing practical guidance for complex real-world situations. The Reynolds Protocol has transformed our approach to discriminatory incidents, a United Airlines training director explained during an industry conference. By establishing clear procedures with documented leadership support, we've reduced crew uncertainty and strengthened consistent response. The systemic improvements extended throughout commercial aviation, creating an environment where dignity-centered operations increasingly became standard practice, rather than exceptional response. The transformation wasn't merely procedural, but fundamentally cultural, shifting expectations for both passengers and crew regarding acceptable behavior in the shared environment of commercial aircraft. As the various legal and professional consequences continued unfolding, the cumulative impact far exceeded the immediate aftermath of a single flight cancellation. What began as one captain's principled stand had catalyzed transformations throughout aviation leadership, regulatory frameworks, operational protocols, and industry culture. The ultimate measure of these changes would emerge not through corporate announcements or regulatory revisions, but through the daily experience of millions of travelers who would never know how significantly one family's dignity and one captain's courage had transformed their journey. Personal transformations. Dad would have been so proud of you. The simple statement from Marcus Reynolds' older sister, Vanessa, carried profound meaning as they sat together on the porch of the family home in suburban Atlanta. The modest house where they'd grown up represented generations of aviation history. Their father, Thomas Reynolds, had been among the first Black commercial pilots for a major airline in the 1980s, facing barriers and discrimination that his children could scarcely imagine. He faced much worse without the support I've received, Marcus replied, watching neighborhood children ride bicycles along the quiet street. Different times, different challenges. But the same courage, Vanessa observed. That's what connects your stories, the willingness to stand on principle when it would have been easier to look away. The personal conversation, rare for the professionally focused Reynolds, revealed dimensions of his historic decision that hadn't appeared in media coverage or industry analysis. Beyond operational considerations and corporate policies lay the deeply personal context that had informed his instinctive response to discrimination aboard Flight 1942. I remember Dad coming home after that Chicago flight, Marcus said quietly. The one where passengers refused to fly if he was the pilot. He never complained, never showed anger. He just kept doing his job excellently, day after day. Excellence as resistance. Vanessa nodded. That's what he always taught us. But you did something different. You used your authority to change the situation, not just endure it. The observation highlighted the generational evolution in addressing discrimination. Thomas Reynolds had demonstrated extraordinary resilience and dignity in an era where structural barriers limited his options for response. His son had inherited that dignity, but applied it through leadership authority that would have been unimaginable for his father's generation. The company actually backed me, Marcus noted, still somewhat surprised by the corporate support that had materialized following his decision. That's the real difference. Dad never had that kind of institutional validation. The personal reflection revealed the deeper significance of Skylink's response beyond operational considerations. By supporting Reynolds unequivocally, The company had validated not just his individual decision, but the fundamental principle that had guided 3 generations of Reynolds family members in aviation. Across town, flight attendant Kevin Baker sat with a small team of colleagues, finalizing the crew training program he had developed based on their experience aboard Flight 1742. At 29, Kevin had unexpectedly become a resource for handling discriminatory incidents throughout the Skylink system. His firsthand experience providing valuable perspective on implementing the Reynolds protocol effectively. The key is early intervention, he explained to the gathered training specialists. We documented 17 instances of discriminatory language before the situation reached Captain Reynolds. Earlier, more direct intervention might have prevented the ultimate cancellation. The observation wasn't self-criticism, but constructive analysis. Kevin had followed existing protocols precisely during the incident. His contribution to the new training program emerged from recognizing the limitations of those protocols and developing more effective approaches based on actual experience. We've developed a 3-tier response framework, he continued, displaying the flowchart on the conference room screen: initial observation, direct intervention, and command escalation. Each tier includes specific language, documentation requirements, and passenger education components. The comprehensive approach transformed Kevin's difficult experience into systematic improvement for the entire organization. Rather than treating the incident as an isolated customer service challenge, he had developed standardized responses that would help future crews navigate similar situations more effectively. The most important element is consistent messaging, Kevin emphasized. Passengers need to hear the same standards from every crew member, every flight, every time. Consistency creates clear expectations that prevent problems before they develop. His evolution from managing a crisis to designing preventive systems represented a profound personal transformation, from reactive customer service to proactive leadership in creating a more dignified travel environment for everyone. In Chicago, First Officer Diana Morales entered the Skylink Operations Center wearing the 4th stripe on her uniform for the first time. Her promotion to captain had been accelerated following her exemplary performance during the Flight 1742 incident and subsequent leadership in implementing dignity-centered operations throughout the system. Captain Morales, the operations manager, greeted her with evident respect. Congratulations on your promotion. Your aircraft is being prepared at Gate C-17. Thank you, Diana replied professionally, though the personal significance of the milestone was difficult to contain. As a Hispanic female pilot in a field still dominated by white men, her advancement to captain represented meaningful progress in diversifying aviation leadership. More significantly, Diana recognized that her promotion hadn't emerged from tokenism or publicity considerations. She had earned her 4th stripe through demonstrated excellence, with her performance during the Reynolds incident serving as evidence of her leadership qualities rather than the sole basis for advancement. The personal transformation extended beyond professional advancement into her understanding of command authority itself. Through Reynolds' example, Diana had witnessed leadership that balanced technical excellence with moral courage, a model she intended to emulate throughout her own command career. Your first officer today is James Wilson, the operations manager informed her. It's his 4th flight with the company, so your mentorship will be particularly valuable. Diana nodded, recognizing the opportunity to influence the next generation of pilots during their formative professional experiences. The responsibility of command extended beyond aircraft operations into shaping the culture and expectations that would ultimately define commercial aviation's future. For the Johnson family, personal transformation took different forms as they processed their unexpected role in aviation history. Mr. Johnson, initially reluctant to pursue formal action following the incident, had gradually recognized the importance of their experience in creating systematic change. I wanted to protect my family from further attention, he explained during a community discussion forum in Chicago. But I've come to understand that our silence would protect the system that allowed this to happen. Sometimes our personal discomfort is the price of progress for those who will come after us. His evolution from private citizen to reluctant public advocate reflected the challenging balance many individuals faced when discrimination thrust them into unwanted spotlight. The Johnsons had never sought attention or recognition, but their willingness to support systematic reform efforts ultimately transformed their difficult experience into meaningful progress. For their daughters, the transformation included developing resilience and perspective beyond their years. 10-year-old twins Zoe and Amara had initially been confused and hurt by Elaine Whitfield's behavior, struggling to understand why a stranger would target their family so aggressively. "Why did that lady hate us when she didn't even know us?" Zoe had asked in the days following the incident. The innocent question revealing the profound impact of discrimination on young children's developing understanding of the world. Their parents had provided age-appropriate explanations while emphasizing the positive response from Captain Reynolds and supportive passengers. Gradually, the girls had developed a framework for understanding their experience that emphasized dignity and courage rather than victimization. Sometimes people are mean because they're scared of differences, Mrs. Bosch Johnson explained during a family discussion. But what matters most is how we respond and how others stand with us. Remember all the people on that plane who supported us? Focus on them, not on the one person who didn't. The simple guidance helped transform a potentially traumatic experience into a foundation for resilience and confidence. Rather than internalizing Whitfield's hostility, the twins increasingly focused on Reynolds' principled leadership in the community that had emerged to support their family's dignity. Perhaps most surprisingly, personal transformation eventually extended to Elaine Whitfield herself, though through a much more difficult and humbling path. Following her termination from TechSphere Solutions and the mounting legal consequences of her behavior, Whitfield had initially doubled down on her position, claiming victim status and denying any discriminatory intent in her actions. The comprehensive video evidence, however, had made such denials increasingly untenable. Faced with potential federal charges and the complete collapse of her professional reputation, Whitfield had reluctantly accepted the settlement offer that included mandatory participation in intensive anti-discrimination training and restorative justice processes. "I didn't see myself in those videos," she admitted during a private counseling session 6 months after the incident. "The person behaving that way, so entitled, so hostile, didn't match my self-image at all. But there I was, unmistakably, treating people horribly for no reason except their appearance." The painful self-recognition represented the beginning of genuine transformation, rather than mere compliance with settlement requirements. Through structured education and difficult personal reflection, Whitfield gradually developed awareness of the unconscious bias and entitled behaviors that had culminated in her very public disgrace. "I can't undo what I did," she acknowledged during the restorative justice process. "But I can commit to learning, growing, and using this experience to help others recognize behaviors they might not see in themselves." While skepticism about her sincerity remained justified, Whitfield's evolution from defiance to genuine remorse suggested the possibility of redemption even for those whose discriminatory behavior had caused significant harm. The transformation would require sustained commitment and concrete actions rather than mere statements. But the potential for positive growth remained present even in the most challenging circumstances. Throughout these various personal journeys, the common thread remained the dignity that Captain Reynolds had championed aboard Flight 1742. By establishing that fundamental principle as non-negotiable, his decision had created space for transformations that extended far beyond operational procedures or corporate policies into the lived experience of individuals throughout the aviation system. The unexpected turn, the cafe near Atlanta International Airport provided neutral territory for what promised to be an extraordinary meeting. Captain Marcus Reynolds, now serving as Skylink's chief pilot for 6 months, arrived precisely on time. His civilian clothing offering no indication of his senior leadership position beyond the perfect posture cultivated through decades of professional discipline. He selected a corner table with good sight lines to the entrance, a habit from his Air Force days that had never quite faded. The location offered sufficient privacy for conversation while remaining public enough for comfort, given the unusual circumstances. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Elaine Whitfield entered the cafe, her appearance markedly different from their last encounter aboard Flight 1742. Gone were the designer accessories and entitled demeanor that had characterized her previous persona. Her business casual attire and subdued manner suggested someone working to rebuild rather than impress. She spotted Reynolds immediately, but hesitated briefly before approaching, the weight of their history evident in her uncertain expression. Reynolds stood politely as she reached the table, maintaining professional courtesy despite the complicated circumstances. "Captain Reynolds," she began, voice steady but lacking the sharp edge he remembered. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I realize this is an unusual request given our history." "Ms. Whitfield," he acknowledged with a professional nod. Please, have a seat. The stilted formality reflected the extraordinary nature of their connection. Two individuals whose brief interaction had catalyzed industry-wide transformation and profoundly altered both their lives, yet who had never actually engaged in genuine conversation. After ordering coffee, an awkward silence settled briefly before Elaine spoke directly to the purpose of her request. I've spent 9 months in intensive diversity education and personal counseling as part of my settlement agreement. During that process, I've come to recognize the profound harm my behavior caused to the Johnson family, to you and your crew, and ultimately to myself. Reynolds maintained neutral expression, allowing her to continue without interruption or premature judgment. I'm not here seeking forgiveness or personal absolution, she clarified, seeming to recognize the potential skepticism her outreach might generate. I understand that my actions have consequences that extend far beyond a simple apology. I'm here because my counselor suggested that genuine growth requires facing those I've harmed directly rather than hiding behind legal settlements and private reflections. The statement suggested authentic progress rather than performance, aligning with reports Reynolds had received through the restorative justice coordinator monitoring Whitfield's case. Following her initial resistance, qualified professionals had documented what appeared to be genuine transformation in her understanding and behavior during the mandated education process. I appreciate your directness, Reynolds replied, maintaining professional composure while acknowledging her statement. May I ask what you hope to accomplish through our meeting today? The question wasn't dismissive but practical, establishing clear purpose for an interaction that carried emotional weight for both participants, despite their vastly different positions in the narrative that had unfolded. 3 things, Elaine replied with evident preparation. First, to acknowledge directly to you that my behavior was inexcusable, regardless of any personal circumstances or stressors I might have been experiencing. Second, to thank you for having the courage to stand for dignity when it would have been professionally safer to look away. And third, to share how I'm working to transform my experience into education that might prevent others from causing similar harm. The comprehensive response suggested thoughtful preparation rather than impulsive outreach. Reynolds noted the absence of self-justification or minimization that had characterized her initial response to the incident, signs of potentially genuine growth through the extensive intervention processes she had undergone. I'm listening, he replied simply, neither accepting nor rejecting her premise, but creating space for further explanation. Over the next hour, their conversation evolved from awkward formality into substantive discussion about the incident's impact and aftermath. Elaine described her intensive education process, including specialized training about the historical context of discrimination in transportation and the cumulative psychological impact of routine discriminatory experiences on targeted individuals and families. The most difficult realization was understanding that what I perceived as an isolated incident was actually part of a lifetime pattern for the Johnson family, she explained. My behavior didn't occur in a vacuum, but added to accumulated trauma they had likely experienced throughout their lives. Reynolds nodded slightly, the observation aligning with his own family's experiences across generations. The recognition of cumulative impact represented significant progress from Whitfield's initial perspective, suggesting education had genuinely expanded her understanding rather than merely modifying her public presentation. I've also come to appreciate more fully the professional risk your decision entailed. She continued, at the time, I assumed your authority was absolute and uncomplicated. I've since learned about the complex pressures commercial pilots navigate when addressing passenger behavior, particularly involving platinum status customers. The acknowledgement of Reynolds' professional context demonstrated research beyond required minimums, suggesting genuine interest in understanding the situation's full dimensions rather than merely completing mandatory requirements. What are your plans moving forward? He asked after listening to her description of the education process. I've developed a corporate training program called Entitlement Blind Spots, based on my experience, she explained. It helps executives recognize how status and privilege can normalize discriminatory behavior we might not recognize in ourselves. Several companies have expressed interest following review by diversity education professionals. The constructive application of her experience suggested authentic commitment beyond mere reputation management. By developing education focused on preventing similar behavior rather than simply rehabilitating her own image, Whitfield demonstrated potential for contributing meaningfully to systemic improvement. The program uses my videos from Flight 1742 as case study material, she added. Seeing myself behave that way remains deeply uncomfortable, but that discomfort creates powerful learning opportunities for others who might not recognize similar patterns in their own behavior. The willingness to use her most humbling moments as educational material suggested a level of accountability that transcended typical image recovery strategies. Rather than distancing herself from the incident, Whitfield appeared to be embracing it as the foundation for a transformed professional identity focused on prevention rather than denial. As their meeting concluded, Reynolds maintained appropriate professional reserve while acknowledging the potentially significant implications of Whitfield's evolution. I appreciate your directness today, Ms. Whitfield. Genuine growth requires courage, particularly when facing those affected by our actions. Thank you for listening, and she replied, I don't expect or request personal forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that your principled stand that day ultimately created opportunity for transformation, not just for the industry, but for me personally as well. The statement captured the unexpected dimensions of the incident's impact, reaching beyond operational protocols and corporate policies into personal transformations that continued unfolding long after the immediate aftermath had receded from public attention. As Reynolds drove back toward Skylink headquarters, he reflected on the extraordinary dimensions of the incident's impact, extending from operational protocols and corporate policies into the personal transformations of individuals throughout the system. The unexpected meeting had added another layer to his understanding of how a single principled decision could catalyze change far beyond its immediate circumstances. 6 months into his tenure as chief pilot, the operational impacts of the Reynolds Protocol had exceeded even optimistic projections. Discriminatory incidents had decreased 84% throughout the Skylink system, while crew reports indicated greater confidence in addressing potential situations before they escalated to critical levels. The clear standards, consistent enforcement, and unequivocal leadership support had transformed not just procedures, but the fundamental culture of the organization. Beyond Skylink itself, industry adoption of similar approaches had accelerated following the FAA's updated passenger conduct guidelines. Major carriers had implemented enhanced training for customer-facing staff, revised loyalty program terms to explicitly establish anti-discrimination expectations, and strengthened reporting mechanisms for documenting concerning behavior before it escalated to disruptive levels. The cumulative impact far exceeded operational metrics or corporate policies, extending into the lived experience of millions of travelers who would never know how one family's dignity and one captain's courage had transformed their journey. The unexpected meeting with Whitfield had simply reinforced what Reynolds had always believed, that principled leadership created ripples of transformation far beyond the immediate circumstances of any single decision. As he pulled into the operations center parking lot, Reynolds checked his watch, still time to review training protocols before his afternoon flight. Despite his elevated leadership responsibilities, he maintained a regular flight schedule, believing that effective aviation leadership required continued direct engagement with the operational environment. His phone chimed with a message from Diana Morales, now Captain Morales, sharing performance metrics from her crew's implementation of the dignity protocols. The data showed continued improvement in early intervention effectiveness, preventing potential incidents before they escalated to disruptive levels. The practical results confirmed what Reynolds had always understood intuitively, that dignity wasn't merely a moral consideration, but a fundamental operational principle. By establishing respect as non-negotiable regardless of status or circumstance, Skylink had created an environment where both passengers and crew members could focus on their shared goal of safe, efficient transportation. As Reynolds entered the operations center, several crew members acknowledged him with respectful nods, recognizing not just his formal authority, but the principled leadership he had demonstrated when it mattered most. The quiet validation reflected the most meaningful consequence of his historic decision, a culture where doing the right thing was recognized and supported at every level of the organization. 8 months after Flight 1742, the unexpected meeting with Elaine Whitfield had added final perspective to an incident that had transformed not just an airline or an industry, but individuals throughout the system, from the Johnson family to the crew members who had supported his decision, from industry leaders who had implemented similar protocols to passengers who experienced more dignified travel. As a result, The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tarmac as Captain Marcus Reynolds completed his pre-flight walk-around inspection of the Boeing 737. 8 months after Flight 1742, the routine procedure carried deeper significance, a tangible reminder of the responsibility and authority that defined commercial aviation leadership. "Beautiful evening for flying," First Officer James Wilson observed, joining Reynolds for the final external check. "Indeed it is," Reynolds agreed, his experienced eyes noting the clear skies and favorable conditions for their flight to Chicago. The same route, the same flight number, yet fundamentally transformed through the principles now embedded throughout the Skylink system. As they entered the cockpit to begin internal preparations, Reynolds noted the small silver pin on Wilson's uniform, the same wings embracing the word dignity that all crew members now wore as a symbol of the airline's commitment to respectful travel for everyone. The visual reminder reflected how thoroughly the principles demonstrated through one decisive moment had been incorporated into the organization's identity and operations. The cabin crew completed their preparations with quiet efficiency, implementing enhanced protocols that had emerged from the Flight 1742 experience. Kevin Baker, now serving as Skylink's Director of Crew Development, had transformed his first-hand experience into comprehensive training programs that equipped teams throughout the system to maintain dignity-centered operations consistently. "Boarding will begin momentarily," the gate announcement echoed through the terminal. "We remind all passengers that Skylink is committed to respectful travel for everyone by choosing to fly with us today. You're agreeing to treat fellow travelers and crew members with the same dignity you expect to receive." The simple statement, now standard across all Skylink departures, established clear expectations before passengers ever entered the aircraft. The proactive approach had proven remarkably effective in preventing incidents, reducing disruptive behavior by establishing shared understanding from the beginning of the travel experience. As boarding commenced, Reynolds observed the process through the cockpit window, noting the diverse passengers who would share the journey to Chicago: families with young children, business travelers reviewing materials, elderly couples assisting each other, a microcosm of humanity unified by their common destination despite their different origins and circumstances. First class settled efficiently, the cabin crew implementing standardized procedures designed to ensure consistent, respectful service for everyone regardless of status or background. The Reynolds protocol had eliminated the subtle hierarchies that once allowed certain passengers to believe their comfort justified others' humiliation, replacing entitlement with clear standards that applied equally throughout the aircraft. "Captain," Kevin approached the cockpit during final preparations. "Everything set in the cabin. Full flight, standard passenger mix. No concerns noted during boarding." "Thank you, Kevin. We should have smooth flying conditions all the way to Chicago." The routine exchange carried deeper meaning for both men, who had shared the watershed experience that transformed not just their airline, but their understanding of leadership itself. What began as a challenging operational disruption had evolved into a defining moment that continued reshaping commercial aviation 8 months later. As departure time approached, Reynolds completed final systems checks with characteristic precision. The technical excellence that had defined his entire career remained unchanged, though now complemented by explicit recognition of the moral courage equally essential to effective aviation leadership. "Skylink 1742, you're cleared for pushback," ground control confirmed through his headset. "Smooth flying, Captain Reynolds." As the aircraft backed away from the gate, Reynolds reflected briefly on the extraordinary journey that had unfolded from one principled decision. The operational disruption had evolved into industry transformation. The corporate risk had yielded market leadership. The personal courage had created professional advancement, not just for himself, but for others throughout the system. Most importantly, the dignity he had defended aboard that fateful flight 8 months earlier had become institutionalized throughout commercial aviation, not through regulations alone, but through cultural evolution that recognized respect as fundamental to the shared experience of air travel. "Skylink 1742 cleared for takeoff," the tower confirmed. Reynolds advanced the throttle smoothly, beginning the journey not just to Chicago, but into a transformed understanding of what commercial aviation could and should represent in its finest form. As the aircraft lifted into the evening sky, he carried with him the lesson that had defined his entire career, but found its fullest expression aboard Flight 1742. True leadership meant doing the right thing regardless of consequences. confident that dignity would ultimately elevate everyone's journey far more than status, convenience, or operational metrics ever could. The principles established through that single decision now benefited millions of travelers who would never know how one family's dignity and one captain's courage had transformed their experience of flight, creating not just smoother journeys, but a more just and respectful world at 37,000 feet and beyond. Did this story of dignity and principled leadership resonate with you? Have you witnessed someone standing up for what's right when it would have been easier to look away? Like, comment, and subscribe to Blacktail Stories for more powerful narratives about courage in the face of discrimination. Your engagement helps us share these important messages with a wider audience. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person's principled stand can transform an entire system. Tag a leader who exemplifies the kind of moral courage Captain Reynolds demonstrated. Remember, real change begins when ordinary people make extraordinary decisions to defend dignity, regardless of the cost.